Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 28th of August meeting of the Board of Education of Charles County. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Schwartz, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We have nobody signed up tonight.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, so first on the agenda that I see is Ms. Acton. And while Ms. Acton makes her way up, just want to make another quick announcement. As some of the public may know, or maybe not all the public, there's currently an application out for the vacated seat in District 1. That application deadline will be extended to the 15th of September. So look for that update on all our social media sites, but I just wanted to make that announcement up front, and we will reiterate it again when we close the meeting. With that, Ms. Acton.
Okay, so we have a FY 2023 intercategory budget transfer request. The superintendent requests an intercategory budget transfer of approximately $2 million in accordance with Education Article 5-105. The request is necessary to support the following. A decrease of $332,213 in administration, which is reallocation of equipment and contracted services. A decrease of $244,000 in mid-level administration, which is reflecting the reallocation of wages, contracted services, supplies, and other charges. A decrease of $200,000 under instruction salaries and wages, which is a reallocation of lapsed salaries related to teacher and instructional assistant wages. A decrease of $620,570, which is other instructional costs, which reflects the reallocation of contracted services and other charges. A decrease of $80,000 under student health services, which is a reallocation of prior year purchase orders related to nursing services. A decrease of $400,000 for operation of plant, which reflects the reallocation of other charges related to vehicle insurance. So we have all of these decreases are needed for an increase of $1.7 million in fixed charges, which is for higher than anticipated health care claims. I want to say while we're on that puts our health care $3 million over budget, and we only asked for a 1.3 increase in our FY24 budget. So there's a potential $2 million swing if we have the same usage.
Yeah, I think the superintendent wants to give a little context.
For a second, Karen, I just wanted to get the board a little bit aligned to what this document is. So this is for FY23. We are currently on FY24. And this readjustment, so Ms. Acton will explain the process of the FY23 budget. For all intents and purposes, for the expenditure of the school system is closed. It is now at the sort of county level, because this is last year's budget. When we do reconciliation on how much the expenses of the benefits of our employees that we give to our employees and the health care and everything else, that comes in at a time where we are always estimating our best estimates on how much that will cost. And what we are coming to you tonight for is about a $2 million increase in what we estimated the cost of maintaining the benefits of our employees that impacted FY23. And so what you have is a categorized items of things where we would request the county, I believe, to shift funding to make up for that unforeseen, if you will, increase in those costs for our benefits for our employees. And then Ms. Acton's also going to talk about the implications of we are right now on FY24 budget. We made an estimate based on the information that we knew, which is lagged information about how much it'll cost us in FY24. But based on the actuals that came up for FY23, we have a delta. We already have a certain amount of money that we think, again, this year, our expenses for our employee benefits may come higher than what we even estimated it to be. And so we're gonna have to build a buffer within this budget and expect in the FY '20 budget, which is coming back to the board sometime in December or January, we will build that buffer back up into our budget. So it's really, we're talking about 3 cycles of funding that I wanted to make sure we just explain.
And just to explain a little bit further, our fiscal year ends June 30th, so we've made estimates and accruals of what those expenses are going to come in at. As we prepare for the audit, which we're in the process of sending everything to our auditors, and we reconcile all these accounts and we get final numbers, that's why we've had to come back to you with this final intercategory budget adjustment. The other item, so the health care claims came in higher, but the other item that is an increase on here is $332,213, which is for food service for uncollected meals. And so that's a concern moving into FY '24 as well, in that if those, numbers, whether we have a placeholder for that or whether those numbers increase remains to be seen, but that's a concern as well. And then the final adjustment is a decrease in $150,000 for capital outlay. So we have to find the areas where we can pull it from, because we have to increase those 2 categories. We can't end the year over budget in categories, so that's why we have to make that change.
Okay. Yeah, please, Dr. Navarro.
So, so it's really 2 main costs.
Yes.
The healthcare claims that came higher than what we expected it to be. The food services, I just want to emphasize, we continue to work with our families to complete the forms, because if you qualify, you can get free meals. You have to complete the forms, and we always our schools work diligently to do that. The 300 plus, the 332,000 plus has come from funds that from families that either do not qualify or didn't follow through. And so that is, unfortunately, it's a high number, but I would say that we are not alone in those high numbers. Those numbers have increased, especially coming after the pandemic, because during the pandemic, if you remember, the federal government had stepped in and provided food for it. There wasn't an income requirement. And so now we're transitioning out of that. We're making sure that our families complete the forms in case they need some support, but we're also seeing an increase in just debt in the accounts for students. And as you are aware, it is the board's policy not to change the food accessibility of our students. And so we have to make that readjustment now that Karen's shop is getting ready for the auditing of the FY '23 budget.
And we do make continuous efforts to collect. So parents have received emails, numerous phone calls. This isn't a problem that we had prior to the pandemic, but it is a problem that we faced this year. As Dr. Navarro said, because meals were free during the pandemic, I think that added to this number.
And so this then, I guess by definition, these are not kids on free and reduced meals. These are kids who can pay, but
Yes.
for whatever reason have not paid.
Correct.
Okay. And maybe some of that, as you said, is we'll say attributable to the time where everyone was getting a free meal. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. Just a question about the unpaid meal accounts. This is more so like forward-leaning. Now that we have kind of this baseline data coming out of the pandemic that says this may be a continuance, we may see this in FY '24, our current year, future years, FY '25. Is the thinking that we just create an account to be prepared in the event that we continue to see this high of a deficit?
So in essence, this is bad debt. It's uncollectible. And from an accounting standpoint, because food and nutrition is a restricted account, that the government gives us money for the food, and then parents pay, those that pay, and it has to be used for food. The money to write these off has to come from the general fund. So as an accounting procedure, it comes from the fund balance. So
Got it.
basically, every year that we write these off, it's going to come from fund balance.
And just a follow-up question, I know that this year, Dr. Navarro, many of our schools qualified for the free meals, not only for breakfast, but also for lunch. Just curious if you believe like this will decrease the number of unpaid balances that we currently see.
Well, so we absolutely want to watch that. I don't think we have a concrete, I don't feel comfortable saying that we have enough data to really make a statement about the behavior of our families around this topic that have outstanding balances. What I will say about the most important thing for us is always we encourage families to complete the forms. And now that we have CEP schools, we have 12 of them. Yes, more kids will get access to food. We're still encouraging those families to fill out an alternate because remember, all that information is not just about the food and nutrition department. It also gives us a wealth index factor of what are our needs. So we actually need everybody, even if you know you don't qualify, to fill out the forms. I fill it out every year and I make a big to-do about filling out my forms, because it is information that puts the wealth index, which ties to how we fare across the state and where our needs. And if we have families that don't complete this form, it severely estimates the needs of our students. So for that reason, I'm always pushing to complete the forms. And obviously, we get better data to really service our families. I'm not 100% sure that the deficit that we have here has been fully incurred by families that don't meet the criteria for free and reduced meals. So we just need to kind of watch that a little more.
No, I appreciate that framing. I think that we as a board can we'll support the system in sort of better explaining the farms form. I think there are many families that look at the form and automatically assume they don't qualify, so they don't fill it out. I know I personally fall into that category, so it's helpful to hear that whether or not you believe you qualify, you most certainly should fill it out and send it back in.
And to respond a little bit to your question on the CEP schools and whether that will help, certainly, but it wasn't a significant portion of this debt.
That came from those schools. That's helpful. Thank you, Ms. Acton.
Yeah, Ms. Morley?
Thank you. Ms. Acton, just to follow up on that, for the benefit of the public, can you explain how this debt is treated? Let's say, Joe Smith had a balance at the end of, the last school year. Do they then start over fresh? Because if we're treating this as uncollectible, it's just completely wiped away. And so in theory, they don't pay last year, it doesn't impact this year. Is that how we typically treat it?
That's correct.
Okay.
But my fear is that now that we have had to adjust it off, that may encourage more people not to pay.
And that was my concern as well. Go ahead, Mr. Hancock.
Yeah, Mr. Hancock and then Ms. Creamer?
Thank you. And just some food for thought. And this is just a question I want to ask. Since apparently there's not much we can do about collecting this debt, something I've often thought of, and it's a question I haven't looked into, are there any, and this is for Dr. Navarro, are there any jurisdictions that when you put a budget together, you just incorporate the food and nutrition into that budget to where no student has to pay?
Yes, so we can estimate to fully, this is a very small percentage of the paying
Sure.
public. So we can absolutely give you how much it would cost for us to fully take over feeding every kid that wanted to eat in schools. I actually think we did this past summer, we did a run of it. So we can get you that information. We can put it as a follow-up so you see. I don't even want to put a number, but it was, and I actually, I'm pretty certain I have it in my head, but I'm not going to say it out loud until you confirm it. But we did do this exercise. It's a multi-million-dollar exercise, by the way.
Sure. No, I know the price.
That I know for sure.
The price is going to be high, but just out of curiosity,
Yes.
what it would cost if we wanted to look into that
Yep.
to eliminate a problem like this, to put a budget together that would also include what the farms would cover through the federal government. What would our costs be moving forward? It's something I've thought about, just never have asked a question, because, a lot of times you'll go to different events or seminars and food is covered in the budget. I said,
Yep.
well, what if the school system just incorporated it in their budget? What would it be? Just out of curiosity. So,
Yep.
thank you.
Ms. Creamer?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Acton, for some of the explanation you already gave was helpful. But I just have a couple of questions. So, one, going back to the healthcare costs that were not budgeted. So according to the intercategory requests, we're 1.7 million over last year's budget. Is that correct? I just want to
We had
confirm.
already increased healthcare at a previous intercategory, so we're now 3 million over.
Oh,
the
gotcha. So
existing
3
budget.
million total from last year. And then how much did we budget for fiscal year
I
'24?
think it was 1.3 million,
So it's not going to be enough.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so is it because we hadn't had those numbers yet, and that's why we just continue to budget kind of similarly to what we had previously?
So we project, it's quite honestly, it's kind of hard to project. We are self-insured.
Yep.
So it depends on the experience that we have that year with all different kinds of ailments. We do have a stop-loss gap of 250,000. So when any member or dependent reaches that, then Care First picks up the rest. But, it's not, we don't get particular information on people, which
No,
we
no,
shouldn't.
understood, yeah.
So you're just doing it based on history, what's happened, and what you're seeing. But you don't have any way of knowing that somebody has just been diagnosed with cancer or they had a premature baby.
Absolutely, yeah.
You don't know it until the bills hit. There's also, one thing that hurt us this year is that, like Children's Hospital negotiates with Care First for higher rates. So we had a claim that came through at the end of the year. They can come back 2 years later with additional charges if they reach a settlement. And there was one big claim that came from Children's Hospital at the end that was from 2021. There'd be no way for us to even know that that was going to happen.
No, absolutely understood. I just think for the benefit of the public to understand that everybody may not understand what self-insured means. So just want to make sure that the public understands that that means that the school system is obligated to pay
Every claim.
every claim for every insured individual that, is covered under the health insurance benefits through Charles County Public Schools. And so these are charges that, as you indicated, we would not know until the claims came in due to, HIPAA privacy
Right.
laws and things like that. So this is just something that, I just think it's helpful for the public to know that these are costs that may not be anticipated, but that we would still always be obligated to pay. And so we'd have to do things like this, like intercategory changes, et cetera. And so thank you. That's
And
helpful.
just kind of, so tying kind of together what we're talking about with these unpaid meals and the health insurance. When Sherry and I project out for the year, we talk a lot about lapsed salaries, and sometimes we think we have, this big windfall at the end of the year.
Right.
But that's part of what we hold aside and say, we're going to estimate that that's going to be X, Y, or Z that we might have to increase. That's part of what we do.
I also had a question about the meal. So my question was going to be the same that Mr. Hancock asked, like what would the cost be if we were to absorb those costs? So would be also interested in hearing that. But do you know or have any idea what percentage of families are not completing the form each year? We don't keep data on that.
No, not really. I mean, we know who has completed it.
But not in terms of, like a number of,
Right.
so do we know, only 20% are completing the form?
No, and even though Dr. Navarro encourages everyone to fill it out, because if you're on the borderline, you may not know it. But there really is no advantage for someone to fill it out that is clearly not going to result in a free or reduced meal. But one other comment on the CEP schools. So the reason that there's not huge savings from those schools is because they have a larger farms population. So those folks are, a lot
Already
of those,
covered.
Yes, a lot
Yep,
of them are
absolutely.
already covered. So that's why it's not a huge savings.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Okay, I was just curious if we had data on that to just kind of get an idea if maybe we could capture more families who would qualify for free and reduced meals. It's just that they're not, may not know that they qualify and because they're not completing the forms, but understood, we don't have that data, so thank you.
Ms. Butler Washington.
Thank you, Ms. Acton.
You're welcome.
I just got a few questions to ask. We look on here and we say, decrease from instruction and salaries. I just wanted to make sure that the public knows this, there is no teacher that's applying for jobs that we're turning away.
That's correct.
Okay, because when people see that, they would assume that, oh my God, they're not accepted application for teacher, we're decreasing, and our children are not learning.
And this is last year's budget, just to make sure that I'm clear, and this is one-time changes.
Right.
So we haven't taken this money out of the budget for this current year. It's still there.
Okay, all right. And then the next question is, and no curriculums like tutoring are been taken away. I think it's for Dr. Navarro. So, all those nice things that we said that was given to the parents and stuff, none of that stuff has been taken away at all.
No. Again, this is last year's budget. It's a reconciliation from last year's funding.
Okay. And I wanted to add about the food service. Have we considered, because I know the community, because I've seen it happen in other communities in other counties, where they go out, the community comes in, and they take care of this budget for us, this decrease right here. And then it gives a fresh start, and then the parents have a fresh start for the next year and say, okay, you have a fresh start, you got 0 on the books. Now, fill out the forms, and we go forth. So have we ever considered asking the community to connect with us? Because I know they will, because I heard like 3 or 4 companies here said they've never been asked.
So,
Yeah, I know that. Go ahead, Dr.
no, go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say that you have had some inquiries on that, but
Yeah, personally, I can say there's been many a business that has asked how they can help, and I steer them towards Dr. Navarro, and anyone can make, and certainly individuals have done this many a times. They can make a donation to the I call it the food bank, to the to the lunch bank to help offset the cost of the kids who haven't paid their bills. You can't earmark it for any specific category of kid. It's just all in this.
and since the money is coming from the general fund, that donation would go to the general fund, and
All right.
so in essence, it would be fine, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let me just follow up to, I'm sorry, you have a question? Go
Well,
ahead.
just more of a statement or a comment that we don't yet know what fiscal year '24, to your point, Ms. Acton.
That's correct.
What cuts, unfortunately, hoping that it won't, but it's too soon to speculate. So I just want to clarify that for the public as well. Again, this is '23 with money that's already largely been spent.
That's correct. And to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Butler Washington asked, the question about, staffing, I think in general, Dr. Navarro would, and Ms. Majors would say that our staffing levels are better this year. If we were fully staffed at any point, we would have
That's-
some serious budget issues.
Yeah, I think that's the point I was going to drive home as well.
What it's looking like right now.
Yeah, we're already, this is public knowledge, but it hasn't been stated in a while. We're already staffing, at least from a teacher perspective, to 99%. Is that correct? So, and that was done several years ago so that we could have savings at the expense of larger class size, so that we could give teachers raises. So, the fact that the things that we budgeted for don't get filled, from a fiscal standpoint, you clap your hands. From a educational equity standpoint, you kind of shake your head. So that's the balance. The one other thing, if there's no other questions, I wanted to there's still gonna be other questions, it's fine, but, and Ms. Kramer hit on it, you don't know what's gonna happen year to year with healthcare costs. Do you get like quarterly statements, monthly statements? So, because I kind of assume that since this came in the next FY, that maybe it was the last quarter of the last
So
FY.
we do get monthly statements, but they're normally like 30 days in
And they're
arrear. And so
Sure.
we get what's called, as part of the audit, we
Yeah.
get what's called a run out.
Right.
So it's not just the expenses that we haven't paid yet for June. It's including, Care First is telling us, we see these medical issues on the horizon. So as
Yeah.
part of our audit, that's what we have to book. So that's part of this, is that,
Yeah.
they're seeing this increase from what we have actually paid.
Sure. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that when we have our audit, which I believe is in October,
September 30th, it
September-
has to be done.
Done, right,
And then
right. So-
we come here in October.
so the auditor will give us a presentation there, and there's something that comes up almost every year called OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which is basically health care for retirees.
Right.
And I forget what it's called, but if green is best, we're not green in that area. And probably a lot of school systems could say that same thing, because you want to keep that at a funding level above some certain acceptable standard. But that money does, people that have earned that deserve it, but it does nothing to educate kids today, but you have to fund it. And so as more people retire and as people live longer, that bill's going to continue to increase. But you'll hear about that fun stuff in October. Ms. Smith and then Ms. Morley.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the background on whatever that acronym was. Learning more stuff
OPEB.
OPEB, with an M? OPEM?
OPEB. OPEB, like boy.
Oh, OPEB, okay.
Post-employment benefits.
Learning something new every day, so thank you for that lesson. I'm curious, you're coming to the board for intercategory transfer, which means that we have the funding available to make this transfer. In the event that we were running an overall deficit, what would be the process to pay this if we had no money available?
We would have to take it from fund balance, because we can't have the expense categories over budget. So we would have to move money from fund balance into the budgeted line items.
Okay, if you can break that down just a little further. So when you say fund balance, but if there was no money available in FY23, we have a zero-based budgeting. We had spent down to zero.
And if we
And
had
now
no
we have
fund
these
bal-
new,
If we had no fund balance, we would have to go back to the county and ask them for additional funding. We have no other option, but we can't, issue bonds or anything like that, which is why we try to be good stewards of the
course.
money that we're getting from the county, because, if we have a roof that, I always pick on Mike because he's got the big expenses, but if there's something major that happens with a building and we have
Certainly.
no funds to take care of it within our budget, then we have to go to the county and ask them for additional funding, which can put them in a bind as well.
That's for anything.
oh, absolutely,
well-
yes. So
Well at Malcolm, that's the one I remember. We had to put a new well at Malcolm, and that was obviously an
water,
unexpected.
heat, HVAC, I mean, things happen all the time. So needing to have a fund to support that.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
All right.
Quick question, Ms. Acton. Can you give us an idea, or I don't know if this is a question for Ms. Majors, since a lot of the costs from the healthcare, of course, are driven by the staffing levels, where are we this year compared to this time last year?
In staffing?
In staffing, yes. Just to
I'll
give us
refer
an
to Ms.
idea
Majors
of,
on that.
what we might be looking at potentially this time next year or sooner.
Well, so you mean in terms of people that we want to hire, the number of people?
Or where the people are already on the books that we know we have to make sure that we cover their health insurance costs?
So total headcount, I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Or the rough vacancy rate?
Vacancies were down in most categories in
Okay.
comparison to last year.
Okay.
Overall, maybe, I think it's maybe less than 100.
So
Okay.
We'll, we'll
Yeah.
we'll get that full report next month. That's on the
Yeah.
agenda next month.
Right. I'm asking because if we're, projecting and, anticipating it, it's very likely that it's going to be even more next year, potentially the shortfall.
To a certain extent, but you just don't know the health of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
You
it
know,
stands to reason if there are more
accidents, yes,
people.
it could.
then-
yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Thank you.
All right.
So I think this is an action item, so formally, I think you have to take an action.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
To make a motion to approve the intercategory budget change.
A second.
so made by Mr. Hancock, seconded by Ms. Brother Washington. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nathan.
You're welcome.
Mr. Heim?
So as Mr. Heim is preparing, I just want to give some context to the board members, if I may. We wanted to give you a quick overview of the policies that influence and dictate the procedures that we follow for redistricting. So Mr. Heim is here to talk to you about that process so that you understand from a policy decision what is happening, and then that will also trigger the next steps of what we will start doing to meet the timeline for redistricting as it relates to the completion and opening of elementary 23. So with that, I'll pass it to Mr. Heim.
Good evening, everyone. So I have a brief presentation this evening on redistricting. So as Dr. Navarro had mentioned, later this fall, we will begin a redistricting process to create two suggested, in working with committees, which we'll get into how those committees are formed near the end of the presentation, but for those two committees to generate two, hopefully, distinct ideas for creating a zone for elementary 23, and then looking at some of those surrounding schools to potentially address any enrollment issues in those surrounding schools. So what happens with any redistricting process is the superintendent gives a charge, and again, that's to create two distinct, or hopefully two distinct proposals for the board to later approve. We're going to look at three of the policies tonight, policy 1900, 1910, and 1930. Policy 1900 says that the board has a primary responsibility to provide school facilities that address changing enrollment patterns and sustain high-quality educational programs. The board realizes that population growth and geographic shifts in population make it difficult to maintain desired staffing and services, which are not an integral part of providing quality education programs at a reasonable cost. Therefore, the board believes it is in the best interest of the school system to adjust enrollment boundary lines from time to time in order to promote more uniform and efficient use of school facilities and resources. The superintendent shall determine when redistricting is needed. Further, the superintendent shall develop appropriate procedures to involve the public in the development of proposals to adjust school boundary lines. Policy 1910, factors to consider when redistricting. As a minimum, the procedures developing redistricting will consider the following factors applied consistently to all schools in the county. Looking at school capacity, impact on educational program, quality of affected schools, student enrollment trends, the age or condition of school buildings involved in the redistricting, reorganizing the impact of increased enrollment on older facilities where a building's physical condition and supporting unities, including septic system, HVAC, cafeteria, etc. And then finally, financial considerations such as temporary housing, operating costs per student. Continuing with those factors, transportation, minimizing the distance to a school, the number of students being transported, and the time spent on the bus. Impact on the community of the school, proposed to be redistricted relative to the size of the student population to be relocated, and the natural boundaries of communities and neighborhoods within which students reside. The desirability of minimizing the redistricting for an elementary or middle school to once every 3 years. And then lastly, the desirability of limiting the movement of high school students after initial enrollment. And then the third policy we want to look at, the board shall make the final decision as to the adjustment of school boundaries. In making the final decision, the board shall consider information, the committee's report, recommendations presented by the superintendent, testimony from affected communities, and testimony and comments from the public. In order for oral or written testimony to be included as part of the record, such testimony must be received 7 days prior to the action. The board and Charles County Public School staff shall welcome public input and participation and promptly provide citizens with the information they request in order to formulate their suggestions and present their testimony. The board reserves the right to modify any proposal to reflect public input. Further, the board shall strive to make redistricting decisions no later than 90 days prior to developed implementation date, except in emergency situations. And again, the purpose of tonight's presentation is to inform the public and make it known to them that we will be starting this process later this fall. And as a result of Elementary 23, which is now under construction. Elementary 23 is going to be the 23rd elementary school. It will be named at a later date. And Ms. Mackey will be giving a presentation on school naming process later this evening. The property was dedicated by developers to St. Charles per docket 90. And we still have 2 additional sites per docket 90. It's located in the Highlands neighborhood at 5860 St. David Drive, White Plains. That's on the southern portion of St. Charles Parkway, across from the Glen Eagles neighborhood. And it's a cost of $45.4 million. The timeline. In October, during the October board meeting, the board will select committee members during the monthly meeting, and will solicit those through them turning in their interest to the schools. October 25th, the redistricting committee community meeting will meet, and what that was a process we changed several years ago. Previously, we would start the redistricting process without gathering any input from the public. So those 2 committees that would form really didn't have any idea going into it what the public's perception of this new school being built and or the proposed boundaries to be changed. So this gives the public an opportunity to voice concerns or to provide input, whether it be positive or negative, even before that process begins. In November, the committee will start meeting weekly to develop those 2 hopefully distinct alternatives. And then they'll continue through December into January. In February, it's our hope that the committee will finalize their 2 proposals. And in March, those committees will present during the March board meeting their 2 hopefully distinct proposals to the superintendent and to the board. In April, after that, 2 hopefully distinct proposals are made known to the public, the board, and the superintendent, we'll hold a redistricting hearing. So again, there'll be another opportunity for the public to come out and at this point voice their concerns in favor or as in opposition to what is being proposed by those 2 groups. We will hold a second date, and that is to be determined, before May, when the superintendent will make a recommendation to the board. And the superintendent can modify one of those 2 proposals that is put forth by the committee. After the superintendent Dr. Barr makes her recommendation to the board, we'll again hold another public hearing later in May on May 22nd. And then it's our anticipation and hope that in June, during the June board meeting, that the board would vote to approve the plan. I talked about the committee and the makeup of that. There's 2 co-facilitators, Steve Andrews, who's our Director of Planning and Construction, and Jason Tompkins, who's our Director of Transportation. We'll also be staffed with central office to help provide information and provide support for those groups and the requests that they have for information. We'll have 2 advisory staff members from county government, from planning and growth management. We'll also have 4 principals who will serve on those committees, 2 each on each one of the committees. We have 11 parent representatives, 2 from the middle school, 1 from the high school, and 8 from the elementary school. And the reason why we have more from the elementary, because this is an elementary school redistricting, and we want to get the input from parents who are going to be primarily affected by these moves. And then we also have 3 randomly selected community members. General guidelines: all neighborhoods are eligible for redistricting except for those currently designated as non-transport walking zones. So basically the block, we have blocks which make up an enrollment area for a school. The block in which that school is located, we would not move anyone within that block where the school is located, which in those cases would include some non-walk zones, or I'm sorry, walk zones, non-transport zones. Whenever possible, neighborhoods should not be divided between different schools. Account for current and future residential development when meeting enrollment targets. And again, that's why we have folks from planning and growth management from the county level involved in this process. Consult with transportation representatives regarding the possible effects to existing bus routes when moving students. And for an existing school, move students furthest from their current school to another school whose current attendance boundaries borders the existing school. So we, Steve Andrews and I have in the past talked about that peeling of the orange or peeling of the of an onion. So you have the school located in the center of that zone. You want to pull away those outer layers because they would be closest to those new schools in which they could potentially be moved. So, questions and comments?
Here to process. Part of it was the opportunity for you to understand the three policies that govern the procedure that we follow. One thing for you, as you ask questions of Mr. Heim about the procedure and so forth, this is about a 10-month process. And effectively tonight, after you've asked your questions, what we do is communication puts out to the community. The school system is redistricting, and we need community members to sign up to want to be part of those committees, because it's not staff that put the recommendation forward, it's the community, as you saw the makeup of parents and county people, and then Mike's staff is primarily facilitating that process to bring you at least 2 proposals. There will be a recommendation from me as I look at the proposals that those community members put together, but it is a community-driven. So I just want to let you know that part of it is starting now before the beginning of September for something that will finalize itself in June. And it is the kickstart to let the community and ask the community for volunteers to want to be considered part of the committee. Thank you.
Questions, I'm sure.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Ms. Warren.
Last point you made about for an existing schools, the whole layering piece, moving students farthest from their current school to another. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So we like to use the analogy of an orange. So that at the core of the orange is the school zone, which we want to move some of those children from because it's an overcrowded school. So you don't want to move the areas that are closest to the center of, or the seeds of that orange. So you want to take those outer layers, the peel of that, and move those to existing schools that are close to in proximity that surround that existing school that is overcrowded. So you're with the hopes of reducing the amount of time it's going to take for them to get to the new school for which they're zoned. So for example, if you're familiar with, let's use Wade as an example. So if Wade was overcrowded, the areas that we'd want to look at to move kids from Wade to the surrounding schools, which would be Billingsley and Barnhart or Middleton. So you'd want to look at those areas that are furthest away from Wade and then move them to potentially Barnhart, Middleton, because in Billingsley, because they would be closer to those schools. So you wouldn't want to move the areas that are directly surrounding that school that is overcrowded because they're in close proximity to that school. So you're peeling away those outer layers.
This school was in District 4, right?
Yes.
And so that's why I'm asking, because I'm getting questions from the community about, in my neighborhood in particular, just ask what's going on with this. So they will have an opportunity to join the conversation and give feedback, as you stated, Dr. Navarro.
Correct. They could request to be a committee member, and if they're not selected as a committee member, then they'll have an opportunity of one of the several hearings that we'll have or information nights that come out and present their concerns with the potential redistricting.
Using that same analogy, one of the schools, so just using the schools in District 4, so you have Arthur Middleton, you have Neal, Brown, and it's another school, Turner.
Mudd.
And Mudd. So a lot of those, the question is, I guess a lot of the developers mentioned, use the schools as a selling point. We know we talked about this already. But, so you're saying those kids would be moved, they wouldn't go, the kids that live right across the street from the school would not go to that school. Is that what you're saying?
No. Just
No, because we're creating a zone. So what would we be doing? So elementary 23 is going to be located right up about a mile and a half from here on St. Charles Parkway. Right. So Highlands, I mentioned that Highlands is in the school is going to be in the Highlands neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, those kids in the Highlands neighborhood are going to go to elementary 23 because they're in that same block where that school is going to be. Then they're going to start looking at those surrounding blocks, whether it be from Middleton, Neal, Brown, even potentially Matula, because those are the surrounding schools to where that new school is being built.
If
So
I
when we
could,
talk about peeling away the layers, we might be taking away some of those outskirts of the Middleton zone, the Matula zone, potentially Neal, Brown, those schools.
Okay.
when we open a new school, and you can correct me on the percentage, we need to open at a certain percentage of the state rated capacity.
We need to open it at 50% capacity, but then within a number of years, we have to be beyond 75%. So it's gonna have a state rated capacity of 778. So we're gonna wanna have at least 500 to 600 kids there. What we don't wanna do is a mistake we've made in the past, is we built some schools, particularly in the early 2000s, with Diggs, Davis, and North Point. We built them almost to capacity when those schools opened. So within several years of them opening, we had to put relocatable classrooms there. So what we've tried to do is we want to meet those targets that the state sets, but we don't want from day one to have it at 100% capacity, knowing that, and particularly with where this school is located, that there is growth. That's one of our major growth areas. So we will direct both of those committees to try to not to fill both of those, or fill that school to capacity from the get-go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's on Ms. Butler-Washington next, and then Ms. Smith.
On the same line as Ms. Warren was saying, when you look at how we place in the students and the parents of these students, because I have seen it where someone live across the street and they go clear the other way. And I'm asking the question of, are we looking at, when we do this, are we now better looking at it and say, you're supposed to, when you go to school, you always think you're going to your neighborhood school instead of going to a different school. And I know the capacity, I understand what you're saying, you don't want everybody to go in there all at one time. But can we look at it where the majority of the kids that live closest to that school will be able to attend that school? Because when you have a parent tell you, the school is right here, but my child is going all the way down, to another direction. I don't know how to address that because I don't know how the process was done. So in my mind, I'm thinking if you live across the street, you would technically go to that school, and that's a walking child, so you don't have to worry about a bus. So it would be beneficial if students who have schools closest to them attend those schools. And I understand the outlier, as you go further out, you can pretty much tell a parent, well, all of these families live this close and you live this far out, so that's why you went there, and they can understand that. So I'm just asking for if we are actually looking at that now.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the directive or the advice that we give to both of those committees. Again, you start with that block where the school is going to be built. Naturally, those kids are going to attend that zone, and then you theoretically, the blocks that are surrounding that initial block where the school is located, you hope to build the school with those. But again, if those blocks, and keep in mind, especially when we're looking at some of those areas of the St. Charles neighborhood, those individual blocks can contain a lot of students. So, and sometimes what we've had to do, we've actually split blocks during a redistricting process. So if you go back, 5-6 years ago, you had the Glen Eagles side with Glen Eagles, and on the other, on Piney Church Road, you had the Piney Reach side. They were all one block. So going back to, it was either the St. Charles High School redistricting, or it was the Billingsley Elementary, at that point, 22 redistricting. We split those blocks because there were so many kids within those blocks. And they do, even though it is St. Charles, there are distinct neighborhoods within the St. Charles development. So you have Wooded Glen, Piney Reach, and so on.
So Mr. Heim keeps mentioning blocks, okay, and that if you look at an older redistricting plan, or when you see the one that comes forth, you'll understand a little better what that means. And the county defines those blocks. Am I correct in that?
And with the school system working with the county on those blocks, yes.
Yeah, and so as Mr. Heim said, generally the block is the smallest unit that you move, and some blocks might have 5 students, some blocks may have 300 students in it. And so in a rare cases, but it happens, and to Mr. Butler Washington's point, you may be closer to one school, but that block is geographically large. And so a lot of the kids in that block may be closer to the school that all of them go to. And it happens sometimes. And you know, believe me, if there's ever a process where you're not going to please everybody, it's redistricting. But just to try to get some delineation on what a block is. So Ms. Smith, and then we'll see who's next after that.
Mr. Hine, well, one, thank you for clarifying. I know this is a science in terms of redistricting, so thank you for clarifying in terms of students who are located like most close to the school versus further out, and what that may look like. I have two questions, just clarifying. Dr. Navarro, you mentioned the communication that would go out to the community in terms of soliciting input, soliciting sort of names to join this redistricting committee. Is it going to target specific parents from these specific schools? Like, would the communication be clear in that we're looking for parents in this area versus parents from?
Put that slide. It's on the slide that he, it's both
Because I know it goes out, because, well, it said that,
there. So,
and then randomly selected community members. So I guess anyone can apply, and then
So-
given where they live, you would
Right,
select.
so we will make sure that it actually goes to the entire county, because there's always interest that comes from a lot of places, but there is a focused area, and Shelley, I don't know if you have the details yet about where, obviously, the regional sites, we want to try to put it out there. We want to put it out in social media, so it's tagged to the communities that are going to be impacted the most, so that they know and they're aware of it, and we try to do it as early as possible.
And a major distinction between the last two bullets, when it says 3 randomly selected community members, they don't necessarily have to be parents. So it can be someone who has no children in the school system.
Okay. And I've been through this once or twice before, so I just want to clarify that if it goes out to the entire county, it's clear that we're asking for a certain number of parents from this specific area versus we may take others from other places, but we're really focusing on families in the District 4 area, as opposed to, I may have folks from my district who are like, oh, I'd love to be on that.
Right.
It's like, but that elementary school isn't necessarily located on this side of the county.
Right, and recall that those names and sort of that information comes back to the board, right?
Yeah, and we would want to caution, we would not want to have, when we say 8 elementary school parents, we would not want to have 8 parents from one school, because we would not want to have an unfair advantage of one school versus, another school or multiple schools.
So will the communication say like parents from Turner or parents from Mudd? Like, we'd love for you to join this committee, just to make sure that we're clarifying.
Ideally, we'd have 8 parents from 8 separate elementary schools.
In and around that area.
Yes, but not necessarily excluding other areas of the county.
Okay. I think I get it. I want to make sure we're not overcommitting, or people are not applying for things that they can't necessarily qualify for.
And again, we don't, we're not making the recommendations to the committees, but it's very likely we may not have 8 elementary schools that are affected or impacted by this. So we may end up having to have parents outside of that.
Understood. Okay.
That zone.
That was my first question. My second question was just around, you mentioned when the school opens, they have to be at 50% capacity, then eventually at 75% capacity. What if we don't reach that 75 capacity? Like, what does it then trigger?
I anticipate we're not going to have any issues with
Yeah, I doubt we
getting-
would. I'm always curious about what the other side is.
funding,
yes,
we get reimbursed from whatever portion that the state has paid for a school is based on when we fill it. So if we don't meet that benchmark, then we wouldn't get reimbursed in the fashion that we thought.
And going back to, in order for the state to give us the funding, which we have, because obviously we've started construction on it, is we had to justify to them that those surrounding schools have enough capacity issues that it warrants a new school being built. So we've already demonstrated to them, based upon our current enrollment, that we would not have an issue getting to those thresholds set by the state. And the thing is, we also want to go beyond just getting those schools to 100% for state rate capacity as well, because if those schools, based upon working with the county and the growth in those the blocks that make up that, we want to try to get them below 100% capacity if we anticipate there's future growth in those schools that we're pulling from. So it's we're trying to meet multiple objectives through the redistricting process.
Again, I appreciate that that's not going to be our issue. But I guess it's the mom in me. I always like to have, plan for the other shoe to drop.
Sure.
And what built-in contingencies do we need to consider? So, thank you.
Welcome.
Ms. Morley?
Thank you, Mr. Heim, for this presentation. Two questions. The first is that you mentioned per docket 90 that there are 2 additional sites.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit? I know we've talked about this before,
Sure.
but could you just kind of refresh what would, is that presumably a middle and high school, or has that decision been made?
No, so just real quickly, docket 90 is a document that goes back prior to the 1970s with the beginning of the St. Charles development, and it's gone through a number of developers through the years. So the current developer is Lennar. So Steve Andrews and I have had numerous meetings with the developers of Lennar over the years. So we were able to establish the site for Elementary 23. If you remember, and this process is still playing out, the original campus for Elementary 23 was going to be a combined elementary and middle school site. And then due to some things that the developer had to change to meet egress issues for the Highlands neighborhood, was that in which we accepted that proposal was to just make Elementary 23 a distinct campus on its own. And we've been working with them, and that process is now going through the county for middle school number 10. Because keep in mind, Pizzota's middle school number 9. So it's not been approved, but we have a handshake, a verbal agreement that middle school 10 would be on Piney Church Road, located across the street from Regency Field, just down from St. Charles High School, so on the opposite side of the street on Piney Church Road. And then they owe us one more per docket 90. We anticipate, based upon what our current yield factors, and that's where we see growth. Our highest growth is at the elementary level, so we anticipate that likely the last site that is owed to us would be an elementary school, but that could change. So that's not part of our CI, our 5-year CIP plan right now, but we anticipate, historically looking at it, and again, where future enrollment growth is, it would likely be an elementary site.
Okay, well, that kind of ties into my second question, because we're clear on how the elementary schools will be impacted, but what about the middle schools? As if I'm not mistaken, the 2 feeder middle schools are Summers and Stoddard, is that
Yes.
correct? And I imagine that's why we're looking at MS10, but that sounds like it's further down the road in the shorter term, because for ES23, we're talking about fall 24 opening?
25.
Oh, 25.
Yes.
Okay, well, that gives us a little bit more time. So I was like, 24, oh man, we might be in trouble.
Yeah.
So do
I'd be sweating if we were still
Okay.
open,
that helps.
I've
Yeah.
been sweating recently, as you're all aware, so I need to make sure I stay hydrated.
Yes,
So-
sir.
So the fall of 25 for elementary 23.
Okay, so are we projecting then that the 2 middle schools currently in existence, Stoddard and Summers, would potentially be able to handle any of this until MS10 is built? Or is that,
We're hoping. So one of the things, keep in mind, with Benjamin Stoddard, was when we first began the process for design, we were going to be demoing more of that existing part of the building than originally that we ended up getting rid of. So we ended up renovating more of the existing building. So we have additional capacity at Stoddard because we were looking at enrollment trends from when we started the design process to when we were ready to begin construction. So thankfully to Karen and through some fund balance, we were able to, that was called Section E of the construction, but we were able to keep an additional 6 or 7 classrooms in Stoddard that were originally going to be torn down. So we have some additional capacity at Stoddard. Good thing with the middle school redistricting process that took effect last school year was that Summers saw a pretty good drop in their enrollment from 900 some students, dropped by about 250 students. So, and also keep in mind with Summers has a number of relocatable classrooms. So they do, not that that's, that Principal Taylor wants to hear that, but they do have room for growth. So that was one of the objectives or one of the charges we gave the prior redistricting committees was to get Summers down, but also not fill Stoddard to capacity from the get-go because we knew that those 2 schools are amongst our growth areas. So including St. Charles, and of course, we've talked also a lot recently about Pine Grove, which was formerly called Heritage Green. So,
okay, thank you, sir.
welcome.
Any other questions? All right.
I have to do a quick transition here,
Okay.
not as good as Taylor Swift between her sets, but. Change the PowerPoint.
You would know, because you did go to the concert, so you would absolutely know.
floor.
You have to go in your booth, Superman.
All right, thanks for bearing with me. All right, so the second presentation I have tonight is the FY25 Capital Improvements Program, the CIP. So tonight is a report item. It'll come back up next month as an action item. Right? So the FY25 Capital Improvements Program. The overview, the Board of Education must submit the approved capital improvement program, the CIP, more commonly known as, to the IAC, the Interagency on Public School Construction, before October 4th. So that's why, again, it's a report item tonight, and next month will be an action item. We also get county approval from that, and we will get a letter from the county showing their support of the CIP. The budget implications, the CIP is developed and submitted consistent with state guidelines in order for us to become fully eligible for state funding. Generally, state planning approvals are required before the county will fund project planning, and a commitment for state construction funding must be given before the county will commit to local construction funding, hence the letter that I had mentioned. Stakeholders involved. The CIP involves the Educational Master Facilities Plan, the EFMP, which will come up later in the school year. And so the CIP and the EFMP were developed with input from CPS staff, but also working with county government staff in planning and growth management, but also at the budget office. Right? The description. The considerations developed in this year's plan include building new capacity to reduce continued overcrowding in our schools while recognizing the county and state affordability constraints, programming modernizations / addition projects that begin to move older school facilities into concurrence with new school facilities, recognizing the need for timely accomplishment of systemic renovations at all school facilities. The county's efforts to identify additional revenues to support the CIP are not yet complete, and we are working jointly to support these efforts. And then the last bullet, using all funding sources available to pair projects at schools and make a larger positive impact to the school community. There are 35 projects that we are submitting to the CIP for this upcoming FY25. The ones that are currently in process, so as we've talked about this in the past, the funding is spread over several years by the county and the state. So as we're aware, TC Martin is in the second year of its renovation, so that is our first project that we want to continue to get funding for to complete that project, which will be completed at the end of next summer with the students and staff from TC Martin moving back in there next fall for the start of school year 24-25. Elementary 23, which we just talked about with the redistricting process, construction is underway, so we're requesting additional funding from the state and the county to continue with that project. General Smallwood, the RTU, that's some HVAC work that we want to get completed there. We already have funding approval for the roof, so we're hoping to do some work with the HVAC concurrently. And then you see future projects there, projects which include a limited renovation at La Plata High School, and then you see several kindergarten additions there. And I'm not going to go through the entire list, but you'll see that there are 35 projects, and they are prioritized based upon need, but also where those, if you're looking at systemic renovation or replacement, based upon where they are at the end of their life cycle. And continuing with local projects, we also are looking for various maintenance project money for FY25 through FY29. Local relocatable classrooms for capacity, site infrastructure replacements at various schools. Some past projects we've done with that would be Jennifer Elementary School and the site work that was done there several summers ago. Prior to that, we did site work at Gail Bailey Elementary School. We did as part of the end of the construction at Eva Turner because we had to do some value engineering, and we cut out originally the site work from the CIP, but again, thanks to Karen and having some fund balance, we were able to do the site work at Eva Turner concurrently while the construction was finishing up at Eva Turner. We were able to separate the bus and car rider traffic. And then lastly, school facilities modernization at various schools. These next three charts show projected enrollment at the elementary level, which goes through 2032. One of the things we have to do every year in working with the Maryland Department of Planning is each spring in April, we have to submit our 10-year enrollment growth, and we compare that to what the state has projected for us. And if any one year we have more than a 5% difference in enrollment, then we have to provide written justification to the county why we believe that there's a 5% difference in enrollment, what we have compared to what they are projecting. You'll see middle school projected enrollment and capacity. And lastly, high school projected enrollment and capacity. So we like to hopefully see is that your projected enrollment is pretty close to your capacity, and where it is not close, then that's when we need to obviously then be working on a plan for addressing that delta between that capacity, whether it be adding additions to schools or brand new construction at any of those levels. And again, tonight was informative, and in terms of what we anticipate in terms of total numbers, we anticipate submitting a total request of about $38 million to the state. Our 10-year average and what we are supposed to get from the state is around $10 million, but fortunately, that number has been higher than the 10-year average the last several years. So for example, in FY29, we submitted a request for $36.2 million. We received $14.8. FY20, we submitted requests for $38.8. We received $13.9. FY21, we submitted $32 million worth of requests. We received $9.8 million. FY22, we submitted $54 million and received $14.6 million. And last year, we submitted $46.3 million in requests and got $22.9 million in actual allocations from the state. One of the things that's been benefiting us over the last several years is you hear about the EGRC, the Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom. So several years ago, the state dropped the threshold or the minimum number of relocatable classrooms from having 300 to 250. So now we qualify for that additional pot of money because we have more than 250 relocatable classrooms. So over the last several years, that's given us anywhere from 1.5 to about 2.9 million in additional funding beyond just the CIP. We've also received some additional money in Healthy Schools Facilities Fund, which has helped us with some roof projects, particularly the John Hanson roof replacement, which was completed last school year. Unfortunately, this year we requested, but we didn't receive any. Another unfortunate part of the Healthy Schools facilities is that it's going to sunset here in the near future, and that money is going to be rolled into the CIP. So this may have been the beginning of the end for us with the Healthy Schools Fund. And one last note regarding the CIP was based upon increasing county wealth. The previous 2 fiscal years, the share between the county and the state was 65% from the state, 35% share for construction costs. Because of increasing wealth in the county for the next 2 fiscal years, including this upcoming year, which we're now submitting, that dropped. So the state share now is 64%, and the county has increased to 36%. So it was a 1% decrease on the state side and 1% increase on the county side. And when we say CIP costs, that's for the bricks and mortar. So that does not include, the furniture and the technology. Those are locally funded as part of the FF&E request that we make to the county.
Mr. Hahn, could you repeat those numbers again for the past years of what you submitted and what we got with fiscal year?
Okay. So I began with FY19. We requested $36.2 million. We received $14.8, and those are rounded numbers.
Right.
FY20, we requested $38.8 million. We received $13.9. FY21, we requested $32 million. We received $9.8 million. FY22, we requested $54 million, and we received $14.6. And this past fiscal year, FY23, we requested $46.3, and we received $22.9, which was more than double our 10-year average.
Right. Great, thank you. Questions? Ms. Smith?
So this is not my ministry, so I may have a few questions for you.
Okay.
When it says planning versus construction, are there costs associated with planning?
Yes.
Okay. So I assume, for instance, I'm just looking at General Smallwood, number 3 on the list, where well, no, that's not a good one. Let's look at J.C. Parks, where there's planning being done in fiscal year '23, or there was, but the construction doesn't begin until FY '25. So I presume you have startup costs and you have to build an out-year cost within every single ask. Does that make sense?
Correct, yeah. So we're actually in the design process for J.C. Parks. So our last several kindergarten additions have ranged from about 3.5 to as much as $6 million for a K addition, and those usually add somewhere between 7,000 to close to 10,000 square feet. So the initial part of that is we need to get design approval from the state, which we have. What we don't have yet is the construction funding. So when we say, construction funding for FY25, that's what we're projecting with anticipation that we would receive at this begin construction at that point.
And how would it work if we didn't receive funding for the construction? So we've already planned and spent money there.
Right.
But if for some unforeseen reason we don't receive the funding for construction,
So we could ask the county to forward fund, and we've had some situations where, the county has forward funded some projects for us. We've also had to go back because if you for our, two of our board members that served on the previous board, when we, going back to the renovation of T.C. Martin, when we submitted that request and then we actually put it out to bid, the bids we got were actually almost close to $10 million over our budget for that. Mm-hmm. So we actually went back to the county and they gave us about an additional $6.5 million, and then the state gave us some. So if we don't get that from the state, we have to push that project back, or we can ask for forward funding from the county. And the county's been usually very good about that, because they know that on the back end, the state is likely going to submit their make good for it at the end. But the issue is that the county has to put that money up front, and more than in this case, their 36% share.
okay.
Another difficult thing is when you continue to push projects back,
Right.
is that the cost of construction continues to increase. So what you may have budgeted to begin in FY25, if you're not beginning until FY26 or 27, construction costs are going to increase. So for example, for this upcoming school year, you're looking at not including site development, but the state is saying that the average around the state is about $404 per square foot for construction, and if you add in site development, that increases it to $481 per square foot.
Okay. And I presume that whatever issue prompted that school to be on this list may worsen if we're not handling it timely, especially around like the new roofs or heating pump replacements or boiler chiller replacements. We're probably putting Band-Aids on things, sort of waiting for funding to fully replace those things.
Right, so going back to the J.C. Parks, K addition, keep in mind, that's a K addition. We've had full K kindergarten for over 15 years now in the state, so we still have not completed all those projects. So that is one of 4 remaining projects that we have left to complete. So, and beyond just the fact that they don't have all the kindergarten classrooms that they need, because what they ended up doing is they ended up taking over a first grade or second grade classroom, which was not designed for, a pre-K or K space. So keep in mind when you do your site visits, elementary schools, when you go into a first, second, third, fourth grade classroom, they don't have self-contained bathrooms. And of course, they're typically smaller as well because of the fact that they don't have self-contained bathrooms, and those kids seem to be seated more than the kids at the pre-K and K age level. So again, just naturally, those program spaces are designed to be larger. So when you got older or younger grades in as older grades, it's not ideal for the type of instruction that's being delivered.
No, of course, no, absolutely. But also looking at items number 7 and 8, Pickawaxen Middle and Mattawoman Middle, in terms of the boiler replacement and roof replacement respectively. If for some reason we didn't receive the funds for construction in FY25, having to push those replacements further out, which of course would require additional costs because we're putting Band-Aids because we can't fully replace those items.
Correct. So yeah. So what you end up doing is you continue to put preventative maintenance money into those systems that you're eventually going to replace anyway. So it'd be ideal if you didn't have to continue to put put the preventive maintenance in them, and not, put these, make those part of the backlog of replacement projects. But you also risk that you could have an imminent failure with one of those systems or with the roofs. We could develop leaks, or breaches with the roof that just does additional damage to areas of the school. So that is a risk. So one of the things also in working with our maintenance staff, and particularly, roof projects, those are seven-figure projects, so that's something that we typically can't fund within the maintenance department. But with the capital outlay and the operating budget we have in maintenance, sometimes we have to take some of those projects, such as a chiller or a boiler or a cooling tower, and just end up doing that work ourselves. Because with the chillers and coolers, they can be, depending upon the size of the unit and the size of the school, can range anywhere from $300,000 to about $500,000. So sometimes some of those systemic things we end up being able to cover within the maintenance, but our preference would be not to be doing that, because we could use that money in other areas of the school or schools that are in need.
No, this is very helpful, and I think for me as well as for the public, running a school system is not just like high-quality programs and high-quality instructors. It's also roofs. It's also health insurance. So I think this is very helpful. And my last question before I pivot to my colleagues is, we heard Ms. Acton mention in the event of an emergency, having to tap into the reserves to, do some emergency maintenance. Is that money that would come from this fund, or is there a separate fund that would handle that?
It would not come from the CIP. No. So if we have an issue with a roof, a boiler, or chiller, number one, we're going to first look to take care of that within our maintenance operating budget. But if it exceeds the budget we have for maintenance, then that's when I'm going to, which, from time to time, I have to come crawling, instead of walking across the street, crawling across the street to Ms. Acton's office and put out my hand and start begging.
Shaking your
But
tin
as
can.
mentioned, with some of these projects I've talked about that we've been able to do on the tail end of projects that we got cut out through value engineering, is that Karen and her staff have worked well with us over the years, because obviously these are things that have to be done. It's not like you want to upgrade some windows because the windows are more energy efficient. When you have a system that's near failure, or you're continuing to put money into it, and it just makes more sense to go ahead and replace that unit, you want to do those things.
No,
Because,
certainly.
obviously, when you're dealing with something with HVAC, you don't want to have a situation where you're not heating and cooling. And we have those times, because you get those emails, from my office and through Shelley's office, when we have, a unit that it's down for a period of days, and it has a big impact on instruction when those things happen.
Certainly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Creamer?
Thank you, Mr. Heim. I agree. I think this is also not in my wheelhouse, but it's helpful. It's just the charts. I like the charts. That really helps me. So just a couple of questions, both for my benefit and I think for the public. So just want to clarify that these funds, capital improvement funds that we're requesting from the state, are earmarked, correct, for certain projects?
Correct, yeah. We have to specifically state, so when the state responds back, they will, so when I talk about last year, we got 22.9 million. Half of that was for TC Martin, and half of that was for Elementary 23. So the state, when they reply back, will specifically state how much they're allocating for a specific project, and if they're given zero towards a specific project.
Right, got it. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think that's important for the public to understand too. So when we receive these funds, we can't just essentially use them how we want to.
Great point.
They have to go toward the projects that are designated by the state. And so, thank you for clarifying that. And my next question is, so you submit, think you said there's 35 projects in total, and I'm assuming some of these have been resubmitted, is that correct? So they've been
Yes.
submitted previously?
Yes.
And so that would be typical of what your normal process would be, right? If they didn't give money this year, we'll just ask again next year, is that kind of?
We'll continue to ask, yes.
Okay.
So for example, which the Westlake roof project, which we started this past spring, I think we, at least 4 times we submitted that until we finally got state approval for construction funding. We already had local construction funding approval, but we were waiting on the state, because that's, 65, and which now will be 64% of that funding.
Okay, and then,
Have to have the county forward fund that entire project.
right, so outside of that, if they do not approve the funds, say, for example, for fiscal year 25, but one of these projects tends to move up in priority, maybe we have an emergency, something happens with a roof, I don't want to speak that into existence, but, you know, if an emergency were to happen, essentially what we would have to do if we did not receive the funds from the state is that we would have to ask the county, or we would have to come up with it ourselves. Is that correct?
Right. And from year to year, if you go back to previous CIP submittals, you'll see that, you know, the ranking of these, the order in these change from year to year based upon need, and again, you know, keeping an eye on our maintenance records.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Mr. Hancock?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Heim. I just wanted to say, you know, this is a good example of just how important our budget really is. While this is not our day-to-day operating budget, if we did have a large emergency, you bring up a chiller replacement, that's something I'm a little bit familiar with, and they are extremely expensive just to buy the equipment without the labor that goes in to do it. And when a chiller goes down, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's got to be replaced, or you don't have any air conditioning. So while this does not have a immediate effect on our operating budget, it can if we are not good stewards of our operating budget and emergency comes up. And how, you know, we have good news that we are hiring more people this year than we are last year. The thing we have to keep in mind is that we will have less lap salaries this year than we had last year. So some people are under the impression that we have all this extra money, when in reality we don't, and we have to be very careful with it. And yes, someone had mentioned earlier, you know, what Mr. Heim does and how important it is, and how much it is a lot of money that he deals with, but it's all very, very important. If we have a school without heating and air conditioning, or if there's a roof that's leaking, or if we can't add on the development to expand the early learning, you know, that all directly affects a student's ability to learn. So just wanted to put that out there, and thank you for all you do, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, appreciate it, Mr. Heim. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Mr. Schwartz.
Evening.
Good evening, sir.
I have two policies to discuss as report items this evening. They've both been brought to the board previously as information items, and will both come back as action items at a future board meeting. The first I'm going to discuss is 5157.7, which is a policy concerning searching students on school grounds. The policy change that we're recommending to the board is to conform with what state law allows concerning the powers and duties of the youth engagement advocates, which are new positions in Charles County Public Schools. And this policy change would allow those individuals to conduct searches as state law allows.
Questions? No, we don't vote on it tonight. We vote on it the next time it comes up. So I did have a question, if no one else does. So you know specifically what type of training these people would have, and I'm assuming it's the same as an administrator.
Yes, they've been trained in the exact same manner that our administrators have been trained. It's brilliant training offered by me, and I did this a couple weeks ago for our youth engagement advocates in our schools in person. It's the exact same training that our administrators receive.
Perfect. Okay, Mr. Hancock and then Ms. Smith.
I'm just going to be very brief, just so the public knows that this is going to be upgraded language to include what we talked about at our last meeting for the youth engagement advocate, which is a new position that's being created. Just so the public doesn't think that we're adjusting policy to give someone authority to search a student. This is just to give this new position as a hopefully not to be used very often or if at all, but it does give that new position, the person in that new position, the authority to do so, to help out with administration. So I just wanted to put that out there if anyone is watching. Thank you.
Ms. Smith.
And just to piggyback on Mr. Hancock's point about the public, I'm always curious from a parent standpoint, like how are we going to roll this out and communicate to parents? Because while the majority of parents may not, or their child may not come in contact with this individual, just understanding sort of what this position's authorities will have and what it may look like, just to ensure that there aren't any surprises, that parents aren't concerned about, well, who is this individual and why do they have access to my child in this way? How are we proactively thinking about communicating with families?
3 different ways. First, this evening, and at a future board meeting when the policy is adopted, we're informing the public through our change in policy that this authority is being given to our youth engagement advocates, who, by the way, are just in our high schools. They're not in middle or elementary schools. The second way is through our parent calendar, which has already been published and does reflect this change as long as the board approves it. And the third is in the Code of Conduct for Students. It's in there as well.
So just to clarify that, so I know that school has already started, and I presume once this is approved, it takes effect immediately. So in terms of the Code of Conduct, parents have already looked at the Code of Conduct. So I as a parent, I know I wouldn't see those 3 avenues as ways of communicating with me. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we target those high school parents to make it clear for them?
So a couple of things that I would say. Actually, we want a lot of students to understand and interact with the youth advocates, because this is not just a punitive. The bulk of their work is not to do search and seizures. It is to be the lead for peer mentoring. I know that the gentleman who is at Thomas Stone actually wrote at Thomas Stone or at La Plata, wrote a letter to their community, introducing who they are, the job description. Dr. Jones has the job descriptions for them. The principals at back to school nights are talking about this position if they haven't already, and who the new staff, as they introduce the new staff to be. This is one aspect of their work, and so we do want to train them explicitly that in those situations, they know exactly what the right protocol is. But I have actually seen high school principals, and, you know, Dr. Jones may want to add to this, that as the principals are introducing parents to their faculty and their staff, they are talking about this position and the job description that is there. To your point, I think any new position, it's important to talk about back to school night opportunities. One of the things that we're doing this year is we're talking, Ms. Kramer, we're talking at all our back to school nights about our school improvement plan. And one of the things that we can also do is add to this additional communications to families about who the individual is. And sort of, as one of them did, introduce himself and a little bit about his background, so that people understand that they're there to really engage with students. And in the few times they need to, engage positively, and in the few times they need to, resort to following our protocols on how to do a proper search as necessary.
No, I appreciate that, thank you. Not to direct day-to-day operations, but also not to infringe on building leaders' autonomy. If we can just make sure there's some type of consistency. Love what you shared in terms of, I believe it was Thomas Stone, the example you shared. But if we could just make sure that the 6 other high schools are thinking about how they're getting that messaging out, would appreciate it, thank you.
Ms. Butler Washington?
Yes. Question, can you elaborate on reasonable belief that the student has in a student possession of them? So to me, when someone has a reasonable, and you don't come with facts, because I operate on facts, and then later on it states that the search was done by a third party, everything would make sense to me if that third party was a parent. Because as a parent, and someone is accusing or saying my child did something, you could put him in the office, call me, I'm there, I'll watch you do the search. I'm the third party, I'm fine. I think a lot of parents will go for that. But to say a reasonable belief that someone has done something and then another third party is there to do the search, with the atmosphere of what's going on these days, it'll put parents under a little duress when you say things of that nature, because we know if this leads to something else, it could affect the person going to college, doing everything, if it turns out to be something else, or if it's false, the anxiety that a child has. So we want to think about all of that because we send our children to school to learn, and we don't want to put extra on them. I know things happen in school, but to me, that third party should be a parent that is witness to when they searching their child.
So a few responses to that. First, this mirrors state law. We didn't come up with these terms. State law requires the searches to be done by assistant principals or youth or security guards in the school. Reasonable belief is a definition created by the Supreme Court in several cases. If you want to come to the training I offer, you can sit and listen to a 30-minute discussion of what reasonable suspicion is. But basically what it means is that the person who's doing the search has to have a reason to think that what they're going to find in the search is something the student shouldn't have. Again, that's a standard set by the Supreme Court of the United States. As far as the third party, I think it would be difficult for an administrator to operate a school if they couldn't conduct reasonable searches unless a parent is present, because if you want to call the parent to school every time a search needs to be done, that'd be disruptive to the school operations. I'm not aware of any school system in the nation that has that as a standard, and state law does not require that either. That third party, though, is there to protect the integrity of the search, to make sure the student is protected, make sure the searcher is doing the right thing. So it's always going to be somebody there to witness the search. It just means that the search can't be done in private. But it doesn't mean that this third party has to be the parent, which would again be, I think, difficult to manage.
I understand everything you just said, but when you said reasonable doubt and when you let ordinary people say reasonable doubt, it doesn't come out and span out the same way as if it was illegal and it was a lawyer saying it and things. I'm just saying that it appears that they're using their best judgment of what is reasonable doubt, because I have seen it happen over and over again. You could say that word, it's in the Supreme Court, but they don't use the word in that term. So it's whatever they feel that they have done. So when I say I work off facts, it's meaning that, did you see something? Can you show me tangible? Can you let me know what happened? Not that I think he did it and I'm gonna search the child. And the second thing is the third party. It doesn't say a parent cannot. So that's why I was saying we could essentially put a parent in there. And I understand that the school might say, that's a hindrance, but if it was my child and you said he did something, I don't imagine a parent who wouldn't fly up here and on the handle and say, okay, I'm here. I'm a witness to this. I'm here for that. So just putting everything in context. When we was going to school, that could have probably be okay. But now when they go to school and things are happening, it's not quite as cut dry now. It's either or. So I'm just putting it all like
Jones
that.
would like to make a comment.
I would, if you don't mind.
Please do.
So I do hear exactly what you're saying, Ms. Butler Washington. I will say that as far as what you're asking, as far as a parent coming and being that third party witness that you're speaking of, and that you would be that parent who would come right up, quite honestly, you are probably one of the very few who would come right up in our experience. And so, not that they wouldn't come, but when we have situations that we are investigating, it is important that we investigate them in as a timely a manner as what we possibly can. That item that you suspect may be on a student may be something that you really can't afford to wait for a parent to arrive in order to do that search. So what we advise our administrators is that when they're doing a search, as much as what they possibly can, that witness should be another administrator. As much as they possibly can. If not, a school counselor can be a person. Typically, we don't ask it to be a teacher. However, if you just don't have any other choice, it can be a teacher. But the first option is that, when we are doing searches, is that the administrators are the ones who are conducting the searches. The youth engagement advocate is a person who will be assisting the administrative team. And so that person can be a part of, one of those persons that you might have to witness the search. Or if need be, that person can now be the leader of that search, but there would be an administrator present in most cases. But we have not said that a parent must be called to be that third party witness. And so we are likely not to put that in place at this point. I think it's certainly something that we can discuss further. But as it stands right now, our administrators have been advised that when they're doing searches that, they should do them as administrators as much as possible, and the witnesses there as much as possible should be administrators as well. Pardon me.
I'm just saying that.
Understood.
Because when that word is there, everybody's reasonable belief is not as cutthroat as it would be when I was growing up.
Understood.
So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Different time.
Different
Yes.
times, you're right.
Mr. Hancock and then Ms. Smith.
Thank you. And since Dr. Jones is at the table, just a real quick question while we're on this subject. While a search is taking place, and forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but are those searches done where the search can be recorded? Are they done in like a room where they can be viewed?
Typically, no.
No? Okay.
We don't have
Okay.
cameras inside of offices in our
Okay.
schools, but we typically try to do those in a private space.
Okay.
And so we don't normally have them done in any sort of way to be recorded.
I was just curious.
Right.
So thank you.
Ms. Smith.
So picking up on a bit of what Ms. Butler-Washington was laying down, I'm thinking more so about unconscious bias. And I think that's where you were going in terms of like reasonable, like the different definitions of the term and how it begins to extend beyond kind of what's in the law to a person's personal sort of view of it. I understand these individuals will have training, which I think is awesome. I'm also curious if we will be tracking the data that comes from this position and comes from the seizures, similar to how we track our discipline data, just so we can keep a close eye on the disparities that may or may not present, but just keeping an eye on like the numbers and the data that comes from any searches that take place.
Yeah, yes,
So,
we do.
To be clear, searches aren't new.
No, we've been doing them for
Okay.
years. Our administrators have. Yeah, so the
Yeah,
only
yeah,
new
it's
part-
it's just the addition of
Yes,
this,
this person.
Principal and assistant.
Exactly, yeah.
One question I think I heard you ask was there going to be data tracked or monitored from this person's intervention, right? The youth engagement? Yes.
And I can broaden that to just searches generally,
Yeah,
but
so
now
that
that this person is
information-
being introduced.
That information, yes, is typically a part of an investigation, which all of that is recorded and documented, and so that data is readily available. The youth engagement advocate, any intervention that they will, be participating in is monitored on a separate log now because they're a new position, so we really want to just sort of monitor that position to see how well that's going to work as well before we bring it into the middle schools. So we got a separate kind of monitoring tool that we're using with them, but all of, that sort of thing is tracked and monitored, just as it is with any of the administrators.
That's helpful. And I assume before we entertain bringing it to the middle schools, we'll be able to make the connection between the value of having that position move from the high school level into the middle school, kind of what we're seeing at that level that would prompt the need for that type of person.
And that's a part of the reason for keeping some of that data, absolutely, yes.
Okay. Just wanting to make the connection, if there is a concern from parents in the community around what this position will do and how it may impact their children, the communication aspect that I was talking about, potentially unconscious bias that Ms. Butler-Washington was talking about, just make sure we're able to square it and make the community aware of how we're monitoring and tracking.
Right.
Ms. Creamer?
Thank you. And yes, Dr. Jones, since you're here, I have a question as well.
I only came up for one thing, that was it. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Well, I apologize. I'll be quick, though. So from a parent perspective, I understand what you're saying about it not being reasonable to expect that the parent be present, fully understand that. But at what point does the parent get engaged or get notified? If you suspect my child, is in possession of something that requires a search based on reasonable suspicion or reasonable belief based on the policy, does the parent get called before the search takes place, after? how is the parent notified or involved in that process?
Yeah, that really depends. The parent is informed anytime there's a search that is done. And so does that happen before or during or after? It really sort of depends. Many times the student, initially with investigations, we're doing the investigation before we call the parent because we want to be able to call the parent to say, here's what I have. I don't want to call to say, hey, listen, got something. I don't know exactly what it is. I'll call you back because parents are then freaking out. So we try to have our ducks in a row before we make the phone call. But in some situations, it may warrant us pausing and calling the parent and maybe soliciting their support in this process. Maybe it is getting them to come up because maybe they are available to do that. Maybe it's, because we've had someone who is super uncooperative and we just needed to get them on the phone to just say, listen, we are very concerned with your child having something on that they shouldn't have, but they are not being cooperative, and so we need your help in some way, shape, or form. We always contact the parent at some point during it, but it really sort of depends on the situation as to whether or not it's done, what stage, at what point that it's done. But they're always contacted anytime there is a search.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure that the public is aware that if this were to happen and the parent is not present, but you will still be notified. Absolutely. And given that information, so that you're not completely unaware that this is taking place at school. So I think that's important for parents to know. Thank you.
Ms. Morley? Oh. You said, Morley. Morley, sorry. No, that's okay. And then Ms. Morley, then Ms. Warren. That's it.
Just more of a suggestion, because I'm understanding and taking in everything my colleagues have said. Very well familiar with how this might be a triggering experience for some people and the concerns they may have around profiling, because it does happen. Yeah. So I fully can appreciate that. Just a suggestion, I know we have several town hall meetings scheduled. Perhaps as part of our communication, we can dedicate some time to take questions from parents, and maybe that might alleviate, hopefully, some of these concerns, and also allow us to be more transparent so that they understand, one, this is something that is already occurring just at the principal and assistant principal level. Two, the rationale for why we're starting this in the high schools. What types of things are we seeing? What concerns do we have? And then three, for the parents that may want to be there before something happens, what rights do they have currently? At the state level, can I be present? Can I be notified before you do? If I personally, as a parent, say, well, maybe I telework, I can be there in 10 minutes before you do anything with my child, before my child sees anything, signs anything, is searched. Do I have that right as a parent? That's something I would suggest to hopefully alleviate some concerns, because I can understand why this would be problematic for some people.
Probably a good idea for us to talk about at the town hall, because I do think that some parents do believe, just as you said, that they have the right to hold up the investigation per se until I get there. Don't question my child until and that's really not a right that parents can ask of administrators.
Right, I'm sorry, that's not coming from the school.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times, just in the general public, there's a lot of misinformation, and people believe that the school has a choice, and we're arbitrarily choosing to do X, Y, and Z. So perhaps also to caveat on that, if we maybe could put something out, just maybe a one-pager, I don't mean to make more work for Ms. Mackey, but just when we have things like this, if we could just create something just quick and simple for the public. This is a change that's coming. This is why it's coming. This is what it means. And always being mindful of these are your rights as a student and as a parent.
And one thing that Mr. Schwartz didn't mention, I don't think, is that administrators are not the only ones trained to do searches. Mm-hmm. There are teachers who are trained, teachers specifically tapped by the principal, typically those that would be attending a field trip. Okay. They can be trained in the event that they had to do one on a field trip. They need to have someone who is trained. So not all teachers are trained,
right.
But there are some who do get trained specifically for that purpose to be able to do it if it has to be done off-site.
And just to piggyback on something Ms. Smith said, and this may be too future thinking at the moment, but we're starting with high school. Is there definite intention to expand to middle school with the youth engagement advocate? And do we have a potential time frame? And the difference between the types of incidents we're seeing at the middle school level versus the high school level, you know. And if you don't have the answers, I understand,
so
but just.
I will look to Dr. Navarro to give a more definitive answer about that.
Sure.
When we discussed this position a while ago, our intention was to bring it to all the secondary schools. The job descriptions, just like we have, I'll give you another job description that's a little different. We have the college and career advisors at the high schools. We will have a middle school version of it, but it's going to be a little different. So the youth engagement advocates at the high school, we plan to monitor and have sort of a very detailed log of their work, of which this is but one component of it. And then we'll be thinking through also at the middle schools, because what we are finding, and the reason their title is talking around engagement and advocates, is because the data was very clear for us that that is something that we needed more in at the secondary level. So that is part of their core work. I think this is a good discussion. This is a very timely discussion, and it's always a discussion that we should have with our community around how parent rights about this piece. But yes, the idea is that we're going to look at the high school, we're going to think about the middle school needs and design something that would come forward in the proposal of what we bring for your proposed budget for next year for the middle schools.
Ms. Warren?
We've talked about a lot around this. I know initially we were just trying to get approval, or not approval, but talk about the whole search process. And a couple of things came to mind. The student, will there be something in place? And I know in schools, like you said, this is not new doing searches. Will there be something in place for after the fact? Meaning when the kid maybe goes from 0 to 1,000, de-escalation, how is the student, transported, or the transition process after the search? That's what I wanted to know. What is the protocol for that?
Sure, yeah, so as we do now, when we have those situations that come up, we typically will involve the counselor in that process when it's all said and done, if it's necessary. There are some occasions where students go through that process and, see, I told you, Ms. Jones, I was good, and it really turns out to be that. You talk to the parent about it, the administrator does, and the student doesn't need a whole lot, it's just not that big a deal. But then for some, you can kind of sense that maybe there's a little more here, I don't need to just send them back. And so we do have those supports available, and we encourage that our counselors are involved as a part of that process to help the student, reacclimate or reengage back when it's time to do that. Many times, I'll be honest, when we are conducting a search, it is because that reasonable suspicion was valid. And so thereafter, there's a consequence that follows. And so the whole idea of reacclimating the student back into the classroom or what have you, whether it's that day or another day, that does all come, but it may not be as immediate because there could be a consequence that does come along with, whatever happened at that point.
And for the most part, students are, I don't like to just say this casually, but like resilient, like when it comes to that teacher-student relationship, counselor-student relationship, principal, they get in trouble, they're mad, then they get over it. But my next question is, do you think, or do you foresee how this could impact the relationship between the youth advocate and the students? Because after all, this is not their entire job. It's not their entire job just to search them, but the other parts of their job, do you think, it can kind of hinder that relationship, or them willing to reach out, to do the job that they were hired to do?
Yeah, that's always something that could happen, and so that's why this is not the main part of their job. We want them to be trained because it could come a time when they are needed, that help is needed from them. but this is not, they're not the primary go-to.
Right,
The
okay.
administrators are for that. We want them to really establish relationships with kids.
Right,
So that,
that's-
the kids do feel good about communicating with them and engaging with them. And we want them to mentor them and help them
Right.
to, peer-to-peer mentor. So we really want them to stay in a good place and not be viewed as, the bad guy per se.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
But at the same time, we do need to have them trained.
Trained just
the
in
event
case.
That
Okay.
something does happen where they have to, help out in that manner.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, thank you, sir.
This will come back at a future board meeting for action.
Yep.
The next policy is policy 7230 concerning naming of school facilities. Current policy is, as you may see, 2 lines long. We're suggesting that those 2 lines be removed and it be replaced by the remaining section of the policy, which is on board docs as all new language. This was brought at a previous board meeting as an information item. It's coming tonight as a report item and be brought back as an action item at a future board meeting.
Questions, comments from anyone? Ms. Butler Washington?
Yes, this is a loan document, renaming. And it kind of put me in the, framing of, is more of, if I have to go through all this, I'm not gonna do it. And I looked at other schools, how they do it. And it's simply as, they give the policy statement, purpose, definition, standards, and responsibilities, delegation, that's it. This is more of a SOP inside of a policy. And I'm asking, because it's clearly Dr. Navarro gives the procedures and implication of the policy. She's one that says, this is how I want you to structure it and stuff. So when I see all of this in here, you're not gonna get a name in school naming. All of what you got in here. It doesn't fit the thing. You 3 times coming to the regular board meeting before you can even consider it. The steps you have to go through, it just, to me, don't look like a policy. It look like something I'm telling you to prevent you from doing this. We allow you to do it, but you gotta do all this stuff before you get to it. And that's not gonna get you to a school naming. It needs to be simplified. And Howard got a perfect one on here. There it says 1 pager, boom, 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 boom. It tells you exactly what you need to do. And I completely understand it. And I know who's responsible. The board is responsible for the naming. Superintendent is responsible for the committees. And she can also, she gives it to the board for approval. So it cuts all of that other stuff out. So this stuff really should be for a committee to, when you give it to the committee, this is what Dr. Navarro says, this is how you're supposed to do what she wants you to do. Because this would scare somebody on a board doc policy.
If I could respond, this policy was suggested by a committee of board members. Ms. Smith and Mr. Hancock came forward with that. It's up to the board how they want their policy to be detailed. If they want to make it simpler, that's the board's choice. And so I'll turn it back to the board.
Yeah. So let me just say, I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Butler Washington to a certain degree, but I'd like to hear what the other board members have to say. But before I comment, Ms. Warren.
Real quick, I have to read over it some more, but to look at it, I understand what you're saying, maybe a new template, because when I see policies, it's like the purpose, definitions, it's just really concise, so it is a lot. Yeah. I was just sitting here kind of like, oh, okay. So I get what you're saying with that, so that's all I have to say. I'll report back later when I got some more.
Yeah. So I think, and I don't know if you're able to see in Howard County and other counties, and I think a lot of what's in here for me are things that are better suited in the superintendent's rule. Much like what we heard in redistricting tonight. Okay, the board has a policy in redistricting, right? And the board's job, if we remember from our board training, is what, right? So sure, the previous policy had one sentence, but that sentence was succinct. And maybe it's not a sentence, maybe it's a paragraph. But the board's job is what? The superintendent's job is how. And so in essence, it makes the board's job easier, makes superintendent's job maybe a little more difficult, but she's probably doing all the heavy lifting anyway. But I think a lot of what's in here is good. It just belongs in a rule. That's my comment. I have a couple more comments, but if Ms. Smith or Mr. Hancock want to comment on that, yeah.
I'll go after you if you don't.
Yep. No, of course. So I think a few things. So yes, we've seen past board policies within Charles County that are very vague and general, and sort of then defer to the superintendent to kind of put together a process to do things. I think the composition of this board and how involved in the community we are, wanting to ensure that we were moving away from ambiguous and vague language and being very specific about the level of community engagement we would like to see around how schools are renamed. So that's essentially why the policy went from 2 lines to several pages. I think wanting to put the renaming process into the communities of the school to be renamed was something where we wanted to empower that community. So being specific about the types of roles we'd like to see on said committee, and of course, Dr. Navarro and her team would manage that, but being very clear, kind of taking the onus on, since again, we are a board of 9 members, a student member who are very engaged in the community, who hear directly from the community. We have a different vantage point than perhaps the superintendent, who is also very involved in the community, but we are involved in a different type of way. So wanting to ensure that we were putting that front and center, putting community front and center, putting the voice of the community front and center. In terms of hearing a policy 3 times before it's voted on, I mean, that's similar to what we currently do. That's exactly what we're doing now. We saw the policy several months ago. We're now discussing it, and then the next meeting, 3rd meeting, we'll vote on it. So that's kind of similar track for what we follow for our past policies. In terms of your point around looking at Howard's County policy, I would love to be able to show you some of the other policies I looked at in terms of Hartford County, Virginia, Dallas Unified, and several other counties that actually take a step further to say we as a board would like to see specific ways of engaging with community as opposed to just saying, please rename the schools and here's some general criteria on how to do it. So wanting to kind of take a page out of that book is sort of, I think, where Mr. Hancock and the team and I sort of went. But I'll yield some time for Mr. Hancock to share his point.
Thank you. And I know there is a lot to it, and a lot of it, especially the first couple paragraphs, and then it goes back into it midway down, kind of talks about what it would entail for us to even begin the process of renaming a school. And I think that's because, when you do that, or if you do that, it is a big deal. And you don't want it to be, someone doesn't like the name of St. Charles High School, so they want to rename it. So if there's not a cause and enough language in there to support, the process of how we do it, I think that's a good chunk of the policy. And then I have a question: if we did do a superintendent's rule, would we be able to see that rule, and would we vote on that rule, or would that just be at the discretion of the superintendent on how that policy? Because I guess we would need a policy of some kind. Correct?
The board does not vote on superintendent's rules, although superintendent certainly takes input from the board on that. And that's, again, that's kind of, that's the way that we and most other counties are set up. I mean, if you're trying to do something, having somebody read 4 pages is not going to endear them to wanting immediately to someone from the public to want to do something. And my opinion, and I think Ms. Butler-Washington, I think that's what she was trying to say. And I'm not discounting anything that was written here. I just think it belongs in a different place. I do have a couple of questions about a couple of things, and you mentioned you wanted to be specific in some areas, although I think some of the things that are written are still a little arbitrary, and you know, boards of education, that's one thing they don't like to deal with. I think this needs to come from the school level up rather than the board, because this says, hey, I think the board thinks we should rename St. Charles High School. So tell me what you'd like to do. Well, I mean, that's the way that I read this. It says, the board may initiate or consider requests to rename an existing school facility.
Consider request, which come.
Initiate.
Or consider request. So if we don't receive a request, but we know that a name of a school does not reflect the values, the core values of us as a school system, yes, we can initiate it. But ultimately, the request can also come from the public. So if, I don't know, one of our middle schools, which is named after, let's be honest, someone who owned other people, the community came forward to say this does not reflect what we believe the core values of our school system to be. We would like to initiate the renaming process. The board we can agree with that.
Absolutely, when it comes from the public.
Right. So it's the or, it's not an and.
I think for the board to arbitrarily say this school needs to be renamed is walking a slippery slope. And then you put the onus on the school to go through a process, and they may come back and say, no, we're good, but thanks anyway. And so I think when it comes from the school level up, there's a lot more credence, and you could send this to every school and send the history of every name to every school to see what they want to do. But that was one thing I had, but I'll say more. Ms. Creamer and then Ms. Butler-Washington.
Well, a couple of things. Thank you, Chairman. First, I just wanted to thank our colleagues here, Ms. Smith and Mr. Hancock, and also Mr. Schwartz for taking this on. And just want to remind everyone, too, that this originally was initiated by a member of the community, Mr. Herman Barber, who is a parent of, I think he said 4 children in Charles County Public Schools. And I believe, and don't quote me, but we can go back and look at previous meetings, this was brought up during the previous board. And he's come back and spoken at public forum several times since then. And so I hear what you're saying, Chairman, in terms of your interpretation, but I don't interpret it in that way. I interpret it in the way that I think Ms. Smith was saying it was intended, which is the board can initiate it, should we feel that that should take place, but that in general, number 1 and number 2 there, the second one, the board may also consider renaming a school or facility if the board determines through petition, through public demonstration, or in some other manner that there is significant community interest to do so. So I think that in being very intentional in this language is making sure that we are considering our community when we did this. And I also tend to agree that in the past, I mean, if you just look at a number of the policies that the board has, the equity policy, for example, vagueness is not always in the best interest of the school system, and it's not always in the best interest of the public. And I, too, have reviewed some other renaming policies, Howard also in particular, and I think what you're just used to is probably the way that Charles County has done their policies, but the way Howard does it is actually, it looks shorter, but it's really broken down into 2 parts. So it has a policy document, and then it has implementation procedures, whereas ours is just sort of all together. Also want to remind everyone that this policy replaced another policy, so it's essentially 2 policies in one. So we only had a naming policy, and we were looking to create a renaming policy, and essentially I think what the committee decided was to combine those 2. So these are just some points that I want everyone to consider when we're reviewing this, and being careful about, how it's worded so that long after any of us are here, that its original intent still continues, and that we preserve the integrity of the reason behind we created the policy in the first place. So those are my comments.
No, so I agree with what you say, but to your point on number 2, how do you quantify that?
What do you mean?
The board may also consider renaming a school or facility if the board determines through petition, public demonstration, or in some other manner that there's significant community interest to do so.
Yeah, if we have several members of the community, like Mr. Barber, who come to public.
Not to interrupt you, but I think that needs to be quantified a little better.
Okay, so you want more specific?
So if it comes, that's why if it comes from the school level, so if 2 people say that a school for any reason, okay, not just for the reasons that have been mentioned here, for a school named for a person that was known to be a spousal abuser, or that was known to have a DWI and killed somebody, all right? If those type of things, so if a couple people come out and say something, which may be completely valid, but they could say it about a lot of things, and it leaves a lot of interpretation to the board. So if it comes from the school level, all these things, then no one can question the efficacy of that change. And again, I'm not.
No, I can appreciate where the question is coming from.
The mechanics behind it, you did a lot of things very well. I mean, there's still, talk about an independent third party will research. I was kind of curious what that might look like.
They exist.
But, sure, Ms. Butler-Washington.
Okay, I'm gonna back up. Thank you all for writing this policy.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I'm into policy, so when we write policies, the policy is written out because they want to be direct, people can understand it. But all of the procedures, it comes for a committee, it comes from someone else. We just direct them to do it. They do all of that. So I look at it as Dr. Navarra doing all of that stuff because she knows her school best. She knows the people, she always involves the community. She's gonna do everything you wrote in here, but it just comes from her. So when it talks about the implementation of procedure, it still is a 1-pager. I can look at it, boom, 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 I got it. This, I'm never gonna read this. I'm just gonna be honest, I'm never gonna read it. I'm never gonna read it because it just tells me that I gotta do all this jumping through the hoop before I can do anything, so I'm not gonna read it. But when you do a 1-pager and you go one, what you're supposed to do, what we're supposed to vote on, that's good. Procedures or how you do it, she knows the system. We don't know the system, know the people, we don't know all of this, so she helps us, do that, and it doesn't come from us, it comes from her, and no one can say that we jumped the aisle and said, let's change all these schools. It comes from Dr. Navarra, and then we just say, okay, we agree with Dr. Navarra because she's done her homework, she knows her system, and we'll do it. It's just the length of it and the procedures and stuff, because SOPs belongs in another, how to do it. It doesn't belong in the policy. Because if in government, we don't put SOPs in the policy. We put it aside when we get ready to do it. So it just need to be down to straight to what it's supposed to be, and just leave the how to the superintendent. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying what's in here is good, but just leave it up to what she's gonna tell them to do. That's it. That's all I have.
So, Chairman, if I can
I want to say something real quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be real short.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, just so I'm clear, I don't have an issue with what's in the content either. I think it's good, but for me, it sounds like you're, what Ms. Butler-Washington has said, just the formatting for me to look at this is just, I'm not gonna read it either. I mean, I read it, but I'm not gonna, it's just, it's doing a lot. But the content and intent is good. You guys did a good job with the specifics, but maybe the formatting, the template, something there needs to change, so.
I know Ms. Morley has had her hand up for a while, but if I
Sure.
could just respond
Yeah.
quickly. So a few things. So one, you mentioned, Dr. Navarro knows her school system. I won't refute that. She absolutely does. But Dr. Navarro is Dr. Navarro. This is a policy that speaks to beyond her tenure. This is a policy that will live on in perpetuity unless another board decides to change it. So this is us saying that of the community that we currently are comprised of, we believe that this level of detail is needed to get at the heart of what the issue is. And so when you say that you may not read the policy, you may not. When you say that someone in the community may not read the policy, they may not. But once it comes before the board that it's time to change the name of a school and we decide to move forward with it, superintendent, in my eyes, will always be Dr. Navarro, but the superintendent will then have the authority to say, the board has decided that this is what the team will be comprised of. I'm going to put a communication out based on the board policy that was approved to say, we're looking for these members of this specific community, of District 4, of District 2, these members specifically around this school who will serve on a committee to do X, Y, and Z job. And then having Dr. Navarro's team to manage said committee to come in and say, you've been selected based on whatever you put forward. Being selected, this is what the criteria will be for renaming based on the policy that's already been approved. So these individuals can go back and look at the policy just to make sure Dr. Navarro's team is truly telling them what the job is. But if they don't want to, they don't have to, because again, the committee will be managed by Dr. Navarro's team and they'll understand what their task is. And in understanding the task, Chairman Lucas brought up sort of who's the third party that will review the name once it's put forward. So once that committee comes up with a list of names for the board to then consider, we've done our due diligence, we're now coming forward to the board to say, these are our top 3 names that we'd like for the school to be renamed after, and here's the explanation for why these particular names for our particular community. This third party will then do a search to ensure that they're not someone who's killed someone with DWI, they're not someone who's owned people in the past, they truly are someone who is of the fabric of our community.
Well, my
And it doesn't
question
even
is,
have to be a name, it could be Mattawoman Brooks, it could be, Weeping Willows, it could be,
my question was more along the lines, who determines the third party?
So the third party is already established. There are organizations out there, and we did.
No, who? The
What's
board?
the name of the organization?
The board, the superintendent, who picks that third
Oh,
party?
we can add that, if that's some detail that you like, certainly. But I mean, the board essentially would pick it. But if you want us to include that the board would pick the third party, that's fine, we can add that too. But I see where you're trying to look for more specificity, and we can certainly add that if that's.
I think you need more specificity, and I would say the board would not choose it. If the board is suggesting to change a name, then some other entity should choose that.
Should choose the third party that will determine.
Yeah.
And I, in quick thought, don't see an issue with that, as long as there is a third party with credentials that vets the names that come before the board, so that we're not making the wrong decision in renaming a school after someone we shouldn't be renaming a school after, because there is obviously a fiscal standpoint tied to this.
So previously, in naming a school, so are you suggesting that there would be a different process for naming a school, vice renaming, that in renaming, you would have this third party review the names?
I believe both processes were similar. And the intent was to have community engagement. The intent was to ensure that the names that are chosen are sound and sufficient and vetted before the board votes. Prior to any adoption.
So you have a committee that comes up with names,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a third party to review those names.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I'm sorry, Ms. Morley, I took the floor from you.
Yeah, Ms. Morley, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to sometimes sit back and let the discussion play out, because a lot, if what I was gonna say is already been said. But, and perhaps to Ms. Kramer's point, we are trying to combine, perhaps we need to bifurcate. Maybe we need to have a naming and a renaming policy, because in looking, for example, at 1910, they're bullet points. I don't want to lose any of the content, because we absolutely do need to be as clear as possible on what the parameters of this will be. But perhaps instead of paragraph form, to Ms. Warren's point about the format of it, perhaps we could have bullet points without losing the content. And I personally am not as concerned with something like this being a one-pager, because this is very important. I want to relay the purpose of it, but I'm also trying to understand Mr. Lucas's point about the what versus the how. And I don't want to step on the superintendent's toes in terms of the how this should look. But I completely agree that this is very thorough, very well thought out. And I like what you put in it, but perhaps maybe some of this is the how. You know, that's just my opinions. And if this is something that, and just throwing this, that Mr. Schwartz can correct me if I'm wrong, are these things that we potentially could package separately and say, okay, Dr. Navarro, or, well, in this case, it would be Dr. Navarro, because we're hoping to begin this process. This is what the board is anticipating this to look like, but this is your charge. This doesn't necessarily need to be in the board policy, if that makes sense. But I don't want to lose, I don't want it to be so vague as to be meaningless, if that makes sense. So I fully appreciate the thought that you put into this. And I'm not as concerned with whether it's 1 page, 2 pages, but I don't want people to walk away and say, okay, well, what does the board want? What does this need to look like? Because then I think you would have wasted your time. And we'll be right back at this point. So,
I mean, I think, Chairman, just to jump in, I know you haven't recognized me, but I'm going to jump on in here. It's me.
Ms. Smith.
So, thank you. In terms of bifurcating, I hear your point, but I think we will have to be clear and I don't believe in this space we can have both. And I think we have to figure out how do we balance this. So one, just to be clear, this is 4 pages. I write policy for a living. 9 to 5, I would say 365, but you're not supposed to work on the weekends. This is what I do, and 4 pages is absolutely nothing. 4 pages is very light. Now let me say I've never written policy for a local system, so perhaps this is an anomaly in that respect. But I think, again, I want to just reiterate the point. While Dr. Navarro is fabulous, and I believe she would truly want to engage community in some way and may write her complimentary rule to reflect that, there is no guarantee going forward. So wanting to ensure that we take this step as a board to say this is something we value. We value community voice. We value hearing from residents surrounding the schools we renamed. We also value if the issue comes up from the community, we're listening and we're attuned to it, but also recognizing that we have been elected to reflect the people. We have been elected to do what is just for the people. So if we see an issue that has not been brought forward from the community, that we should still step in and say, we see a wrong here, and we'd like to figure out a way of working with community to right it.
Well, I did, and I'm just, I don't know where to start right now. So I'll go back to, I have 2 things, and this is actually one, Jamila's not going to like this, but I do kind of disagree with the one thing to where the board may initiate. And, I just think, I do believe if we create this policy, we're going to get public opinion. I just believe that's going to happen because the policy hasn't been there. There are people that have said they're waiting for the policy. I respectfully disagree with you, which I seldom do, but I just don't think it is our role. And I was there when this was written, and I was okay with it then. But as I'm reading and hearing it, I just don't know. I don't believe we should be in the business of initiating that. Just because I don't think it's something we would do with anything else. Usually every decision we make, now there are times we'll float an idea around, but we will only act upon it if there is, feedback or criticism or input from the public. I would never do anything that I felt I was the only person that wanted to do it. So I would be okay with if we just took that the board may initiate line out, or the board, and then leave the rest the same. I can also hear what you're saying with if you did make it a superintendent's rule, knowing that this policy does encompass pretty much, I can't speak for everyone, we haven't voted on it, but if the superintendent were to take this and create a rule based on what's in it, and now I don't know what the steps are from that, how we would vote on that, but we would still need some kind of policy, correct? Because that's what has prevented anything from happening, right? Wouldn't we need some type of policy?
To rename.
To rename, correct. To
Sure,
rename.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, we need a
Okay,
policy.
sure. So those are just my thoughts, and that's all I got to say for right now.
So
Thank
just
you.
to clarify to make sure I understand. Again, I'm just going rogue. Sorry, Chairperson. Thank you for recognizing me. So just to make sure I'm understanding, Mr. Hancock, so you're looking to remove the piece where the board, excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied, it's getting late.
No, it's
The
okay.
board initiates renaming.
Correct.
And then the second part is getting more specific with the what versus the how, and sort of
As
getting
far
the
as giving-
bifurcation that Ms. Morley was talking about?
As far as allowing it to be a superintendent's rule,
Mm-hmm.
I can see both sides of the coin here, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This does put a lot of onus and a lot of responsibility on us. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but we do, there's a fine line between creating policy, which is what we do, and then enforcing the policy, which is what we don't do. And this kind of teeter-totters on both of them, which is why I'm saying, I think it's clear what our intent is, and what we would like to see a policy or a rule drafted, but also doesn't let us get too far into the weeds of the day-to-day, and this wouldn't be day-to-day, but initiating it and making it happen. So
I hear you.
I think, and I see, let me just comment. So I understand your point, Ms. Smith, about wanting to be intentional. And I think that a paragraph or a couple sentences that says the Board of Education understands or realizes that the renaming of schools is necessary due to historical context associated with the names that affect the constituency, or something along those lines. So that the board is saying, yeah, look, we hear you, and we understand that a name change is warranted. And I think, and I appreciate what you're getting to with that, with the board wanting to be intentional. And I think maybe language like that would for me, it would go a long way. And just saying, look, as a board, we understand this, and understanding that there could be a need for a change. Just wanted to mention that, Ms. Morley.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. I want to say I agreed with a lot of what Ms. Smith was saying, and have to disagree with the good gentleman, Mr. Hancock. I personally don't have an issue. I know, it happens. I don't have an issue with the board initiating this, because to me, the committee, which inevitably almost anything we do outside of public input is going to involve a committee, especially something this substantive. To me, the committee would act as a checks and balances to give us the input as to whether or not there is, a need for this. Is this something that the public would support? Is there something that warrants this change? And I also think that there are times where the board does have to, to me, it was what we were elected to do. We do have to have the foresight to say, okay, even if there hasn't been a huge public output, is this fair and just? Does this reflect the values of the community that we serve? And I don't think that a lot of these names as they stand do. And that's my personal opinion on it. As I said before, I'm less concerned with how long this ends up being and more concerned with, is this clear and concise? Can anyone reading this understand what our intent was behind it, what we were trying to get at? Does this reflect the values? Because just like this policy would be in place until there's a new board, likewise, the superintendent rule would be in place until there's a new superintendent. So I think, just to reiterate again, if we could perhaps have key bullet points similar to like rule, for example, 1910, to me, yeah, it probably could play with the wording a little bit around redistricting, but it's clear in reading that what exactly we're trying to get at. What is the core purpose of having this particular policy? Why does the board feel that there's a need? So I'm not going to die on the hill as to whether we have one policy or two, naming, renaming, we combine it. That's not. It's more important to me that it's specific, it's purposeful, and that we understand why we have it. And so hopefully that that makes sense. But I thank you all again, because this is very specific, very detailed, and there was a lot of work that went behind this. So my last point again is that I don't want to overlap into the how, which I think is how the superintendent, that's her role. The how is, okay, for me, perhaps, getting into what the committee would look like, because if that's not typically something that this board has done in the past, then maybe we stop right before that point. So.
Ms. Butler Washington.
Yes, again. Majority of the United States read on the 8th grade level, and we know that. And long stuff, they do not typically read, and we want people to read the policy, so they won't come to the board meeting saying they don't understand this, they didn't know this. Straightforward, what you wrote is brilliant. We're not taking anything from you, but it's the structure of how you have it, because you have the SOP part in there telling, you created it and you say, by the way, I'm gonna tell you how to do it. Policies are not pretty much written like that. It's the Board of Education, because she's the how, she has to say that. Not typically us say that, because we get in trouble when we do that, because we don't did everything. We didn't seek the help. We told them, this is the policy, and by the way, this is how you're gonna do it. So the board works is, whatever Dr. Navarro brings up, or whomever is in this seat brings up, it's us who says, okay, she said this, and we agree or don't agree on the policy. But how it's written, it has everything in here, and we need to do the SOP another way. We don't need to put the SOP piece in here. And I know you want to be intentional, you want to be straightforward. It is straightforward, because your top bullets, your three, without the bullets, this is straightforward without getting into the meat of it. Because if you say what it is and how you're going to do it and who you're going to invite and everything else, it doesn't leave room for anything else. Because it's not I suppose I'm used to a policy where it's straight, just give me what I need, and then if I need to know how to do it, I go to my SOP, and it tells me how to do it. It's not in the policy, is what I'm trying to say. All of this is not in a policy, because I'm not used to a policy dictating what we're supposed to do and write the policy. It's just how it's written. The template would be different if it was just, you just wrote the policy, and then Dr. Navarro, we looked at the policy and we say, okay, we agree. And then when it's time to get the committee and do all that, that's Dr. Navarro, the superintendent's lane, and she does all that stuff. And then when they come back and do what they're gonna do and they bring it back to us, then we vote on that piece that the community brings back to us and stuff. So that's it.
Do you have a comment?
Yes.
Because I was
Yeah. Mr. Hancock, you're supposed to be my wingman. Where are you going? Where are you going, Ms. Hancock? It's only 8:30. So I think, Ms. Butler Washington, to your point, I hear your point. I respectfully disagree, but I do hear your point. I think, again, when the issue was brought forward, for us, the first time we heard it was at the end of the previous board, when the gentleman that, Mr. Barber, exactly brought it forward, essentially explaining that he had brought it to previous board meetings, and there hadn't been any movement. So when this board stepped in, I appreciated that Chairman Lucas, one of the first orders of business was, I'm going to appoint a small committee to deal with this. When we first looked at it, Mr. Hancock and I, in terms of the process, we did research. We looked at other school systems. We looked at public comment from other systems. We even went so far, well, I know I went so far as to actually have conversations with colleagues in different jurisdictions to learn more about the third parties that they use to vet these systems. Exploring why they went so far as to have a lengthier process versus, well, not process, a lengthier policy document versus sort of the short version. And I bristle at calling it lengthy because it's 4 pages, and the majority of it is bullets and numbers. So when we talk about the majority of the country reading on an 8th grade level, I don't know that we should write a policy to an 8th grade level. I think the language is plain. I think the language is direct in that respect. But I'm sorry, I'm taking a bird walk. So getting back to in terms of why we were appointed to do this work. The policy walks through specifically what is to happen to ensure, again, that we are truly engaging community. Something that we all ran on, something that we are all, I mean, every weekend we're out there, every week we're out there. You know, all the book bag and supply drives, working in various organizations, we are members of the community. So ensuring that when we talk about community, that we actually have a policy that reflects our collective values to engage community. Thank you, Mr. Hancock. So I hear your points in terms of policies that you're accustomed to and what you believe the policy should look like, and I respectfully disagree. So of course, once the board votes on it, the policy as revised will be, and I of course will support it, but just wanting to ensure that all of my colleagues are aware of the information that went into it, the research that went into it, not necessarily just the work, but also how intentional we were with language and why we went from a 2-sentence policy to a more extensive policy.
So, yeah, Dr. Navarro, please.
So, you know, I have to say, I know it's painful, I know it's late, but this is a really good, proud moment for the board. This is exactly the kind of discussions that the board should have about its fundamental role, about how much it wants to go into generating policies. So I actually have to say, and having woken up very, very early this morning and having to wake up early tomorrow because I'm not done my school visits yet, I really, and it is getting a little warm in here. I think Mr. Heim might have turned up the heat intentionally to do this. These public conversations are being recorded and taken into the record because the deliberation about how you define policy is extremely important. It is extremely important. For the sake of process, I have a suggestion for, and I'm looking at Eric to see if this is an important one. So Mr. Lucas, as the chair, had a subcommittee come up with this option. This is the second time that the board gets to look at it. There is clearly a subset of the board that would like for it to potentially look different, formatted differently, perhaps see what it would look like if it was a policy and an accompanying superintendent rule. What I will say about the superintendent rule, though, is while the superintendent sitting at the chair is their discretion, if you will, to read the policy and then determine the superintendent rule, last year, I believe it was Ms. Abel, requested that any changes or any new superintendent rules, although the board can't say yea or nay to them, that they would actually come to the board so that they would be aware of what those are. So that's an important thing to remember, that the superintendent rules no more, because I agreed as the superintendent at that time that we would do this. So my subsequent superintendents can point to me that I agreed with the board that makes sense. That they come to you. So I propose, and this is something that the board can continue to deliberate on, but I will acknowledge that we have heard from the community about this interest that this board look at this policy and hopefully move in the direction of having a process by which the community can look at how it renames its schools. So I do feel a sense of urgency since I've gotten here from listening to community members that there is movement on this. But for the intent of this evening, I am wondering if the board feels like we could take a shot at looking at this and organizing it just based on all the notes that I've heard from different perspectives. and then visually present you some options as you are moving forward to think through them, and as we're getting ready for the next level of discussion. And the board is always able to say, we want to take a little bit longer, or we think we like to take a vote on this or that.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that, and if not, the superintendent, I mean, certainly can do it, or I could work with the both of you and put something together and run it by you. And again, I don't think the information is good. It's just, again, and I appreciate your attention to detail, but I would like someone to be able just to read the policy and say, wow, I can do that. And that's all they have to do to initiate it. And they indeed might get discouraged if they read everything, that the whole process as you define, which is good. So I think if I heard you, we can come back with a revision to this that hopefully satisfies everything we heard tonight. Is that, yes?
I think that's fine for me. I want to be sure that we're being timely. I think we've taken some time. I know that we have several other things before us. We are always busy. So just ensuring that we are being timely in terms of whatever the feedback is, however we're gathering, however we're making determinations.
Sure, I think it comes back next month.
Okay. And just ensuring that, I heard either the suggestion that Dr. Navarro and her team sort of do something, or you work with Mr. Hancock and I.
Both work with you and her. I mean,
Well,
I
just
can,
wanting to ensure, because I know that it's been sitting for a while, and I know colleagues have had an opportunity for several weeks to look at it.
sure.
More than several weeks to look at it. So if there is opportunity that colleagues want to take to sort of redline or go through, don't want to lose some of their thoughts as well.
No, for sure. No, I agree. Ms. Morley?
I want to say that I second the superintendent's suggestion, because I don't want to lose the core of this and the content. I like the idea of separating the board's policy from accompanying superintendent rule. For me, I think that would be a good compromise, because then we're clear on what it is the board is charging, what the board's purpose and policy is, and also understanding how this will be accomplished, what the superintendent's charge is. So I think for me, that would be a good compromise without losing the substance of what we have.
I hear that, but in terms of substance, we have no authority over the superintendent's rules.
Right. But
So if we were to write a policy that says the board would like to authorize a renaming policy or something to that effect, and then the superintendent comes forward and says, okay, well, I will decide what the names of the schools are.
No,
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 that's
no,
not
no,
what
that
I'm
would not
taking
be in the
from this.
superintendent rule. No.
No, I'm just
No,
saying,
no,
I
no,
wouldn't even
that-
want that in the board policy for me.
That will not be in the superintendent rule.
Yeah.
Is that in terms of the superintendent's rules, once it leaves our domain, and the superintendent decides sort of the how of it,
The policy,
It's
the
still within the
superintendent-
parameters of the policy, though.
but the superintendent, right, but if the policy then bifurcates we want there to be a renaming policy versus this is how we recommend that you go about it, we're separating those two. Once we get into the realm of this is how you go about it, and it ends up in the superintendent's rule, I'm sorry, rule, right, am I correct?
Yeah.
So-
Rule, it is up to the superintendent to decide how that happens, and we have no domain in that space.
let me just jump in. No, that's not correct. You write the policy so that the board approves
Yeah,
a naming and renaming.
yeah.
It,
Yeah, that was my point.
yeah, but you write that in the policy, so there's no ambiguity there about who is approving the name.
And that the rule can't override the policy, is that your point?
Correct.
I think
Yeah.
I'm missing a point. I think Ms. Morley is getting it, but I'm still missing it.
So the policy is written that the board, I'm spitballing, the board understands that there may be instances where a school needs to be renamed.
Right.
The process for doing that, including soliciting school input and selecting members, will lie with the superintendent, and subsequent renamings will come back to the Board of Education for approval.
I hear it. I'm processing.
I'm,
And I think
that
I
was
need
off
to
top, I
process
was off the top
beyond-
of my head from being up since
It was
4
decent.
o'clock.
It was
Right.
decent.
Yeah.
I need to process it a bit more, but I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, so that we don't get into these hypotheticals, I always find it that things written out, because I do believe that the board has an interest and would push it, that the decision, again, at the end lie with the board on the final naming or renaming. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes if we see it fleshed out in writing, it might be easier to think about sort of a policy that begins with the board stating the why, directing the superintendent on the details on how to make it, and then redirecting the superintendent to come back with options for the board to approve or not approve. And in many ways, there, in former school districts that I've worked in that have engaged in this process, there have been times when the superintendent, through the community process, brings forward recommendations that the board tells the superintendent to go back into the drawing board with the community and bring back other options. Or there's been time when the board has approved the recommendations that the superintendent has organized and supported the community to bring forward to the board. It really is the community also bringing recommendations forward, and I think that's the intent of this.
Yes.
And the role of the superintendent is to facilitate and be very clear on how that happens.
Yeah.
And to facilitate that process to bring forward those recommendations from the community, the
Yeah.
school's community, back to the superintendent.
Yeah.
But I think in writing them through allows also your brain, just where you are, to visually be more specific about the yays and nays of your own independent, sort of what you're thinking to be captured in some kind of written. And I'm happy to do it, I'm happy to delegate it, whatever the board deems as the right steps. I just think that without having something else in writing, now that we've evolved to this conversation, we
No.
won't see it until we see an option
No,
or two.
and we'll see it next month. And with that, I know we could talk all night, but I think we're at a good stopping point right now. Please, sorry, because I know we could go back and forth all night, and you can jump me in the parking lot. Yeah. So, anything else, Mr. Schwartz?
Do you need anything? We've had the conversation. We can start over again if you'd like.
Mr. Lucas, just for clarification, there is going to be something brought back in writing to the board at the next board meeting to reflect on. I just want to make sure, and then who's doing it? Taskmaster at hand, I'm sorry.
We're going to say next month, whether it's at the board meeting or the work
Okay.
session. Just
All right,
Yes.
look at what we have to get done. I will work,
okay.
you, me, Ms. Smith, Mr. Hancock,
Yep.
and we'll get something done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's the first thing you said all night.
Ms. Thomas, Mr. Hancock, and I'd just like to say, very good discussion for everybody. Thank you
Yes,
very much.
thank you all for your
All those in
feedback.
favor, raise your hand. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to do that.
I think